You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Ricky Coogan, Brat Pack Sleazebag. Elijah C. Scuggs, Freak Show Tycoon, an amateur bioengineer.
I can look at a guy like Kevin Costner and see a giant peach globe.
When fate brought them together, Mr. Scuggs took an average Hollywood slime ball and made something out of him.
It was a simple burglary that went horribly wrong.
It is my opinion that the deceased was a tragic victim of his own misguided judgment.
Now the nightmare is over at last, and the fun is about to begin.
3 to 5 says I leave them alone.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on. Invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise. And at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
I'm not even going to get into too many details about next week, but just know that one of the characters wields a harpoon for a weapon, which is just incredibly powerful. So join that sleaze, please.
Hell yeah. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover as well. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for 5 to 6 years. There's like 140 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which there's like almost 50 of, where we talk about new release genre films, which we're getting into the back half of the year. There's lots of genre movies on the way. There's some horror trash I'm sure we're going to get around to. I saw you watch the Dracula boat movie, Jamie, and you kind of liked it. I'm going to have to check it out. So
yeah, it had some, it could use more, but it had some actual surprising gore in it and stuff. So yeah, I had fun.
Yeah. So patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast for anyone interested in those bonus episodes, as always. And speaking of which, we are going to give the shout outs right here. So welcome to The Youth Critic, subscribe for $5 a month, Zed Adams, Noah Rollings, Mark, Lex L, Johnny Mockney, Harry Nazan, Alexander Paul, Sam Prickett, Jane Griffin, who upped her subscription from $5 a month to $10 a month and joining us for the monthly virtual screenings, which we try to do live on the last Thursday of every given month. So, and one of the movies we're talking about today actually was done on a virtual screening. So,
yeah.
And actually one of the ones next week too. So the virtual screenings, they're getting to the point where they're actually becoming influential enough that they are informing the show. So if you're interested, again, sign up. We also had Commie Mike sign up at $5 a month. We had John Warren sign up, John Hollis, Enrique Ortiz. We had Moderately Cold also do the $5 to $10 a month upgrade. Thank you to Moderately Cold. We had Jordan Edwards sign up at $5, William Herman, New Metal Jacket, and Scott Garvin. So thanks so much to all of you folks. Hope you are enjoying those bonus episodes, and we appreciate the support.
Yes, thank you.
That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening on either one of those platforms, and I see the stats, I see you right now listening on both of those platforms. I'm looking into your soul. Please give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners, and we appreciate that support as well. And then the very last plug for the week, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you can think of. And you guys have thought of a lot of things. We've had people buy pens. We've had people buy pillows, notebooks, hoodies, just posters for their place. You can find the link to that in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com if you are interested. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over on the main feed would have heard from us, and we would have had a special returning guest, Spencer Ryder from the Those Good Old Fashioned Values podcast, on to talk some white knuckle, impeccably crafted, authentic, process-based French thrillers. What a mouthful. We talked Henry Georges Clouzot's now pretty iconic and well-known The Wages of Fear from 1953, which is all about, for anyone who has maybe seen it remade into William Friedkin's Sorcerer, it is all about a very precarious, expendable labor force in Latin America going on a suicide mission to carry nitroglycerin through the mountains for an American oil company, and it is true edge-of-your-seat insanity. And it was cool to finally go back and see the original version, since we had already covered Sorcerer previously. And we paired that film with Jacques Becker's Le Trou, or The Hole, from 1960, which is exactly what it is titled. It is based on a real 1947 prison break attempt, and the film actually co-stars one of the actual prisoners who did it, and it is a very minute, meticulous procedural on how they dug a hole through their prison and tried to make their way out. And the key word there, I guess, is tried, for anyone who wants a spoiler on the bleak ending.
Yeah, you do have to see a lot of just pounding of cement and filing down of metal bars in order for them to just come up short. It is kind of heart-wrenching in that sense.
Sitting through 4 minutes unbroken shots of those guys just pounding the floor and bonding through the work effort that they are all putting in with their bodies, and then just all for ultimately betrayal as it goes. But Spencer's pick over on the main feed 2 weeks ago actually directly inspired us last week, moving on over to the Patreon feed for the patrons exclusively, where jumping off Le Trou, we did some similarly minute process-based thrills of watching skilled technicians very much planning and executing these biographical prison breaks that also kind of take on an existential quality through how they've been shot and how they've been made. So we of course had to discuss maybe the most famous example for any cinephile with a Criterion subscription, Robert Bresson's A Man Escaped from 1956, which takes a very sort of minimalist and abstracted approach to its procedural prison break subject matter. As a World War II resistance fighter makes his way out of a Nazi prison, and he does so in the Bressonian, very stripped down, very austere style in order to find his way into this very artistic and psychological and spiritual realm with the material. So we had some fun talking about that, as well as Escape from Alcatraz from 1979, which was essentially the gritty American tough guy version / borderline remake of A Man Escaped by Hollywood veteran Don Siegel, and obviously Mr. Clint Eastwood playing Frank Morris, the guy who did supposedly successfully escape from Alcatraz, resulting in Alcatraz being shut down in the 1960s.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun to watch A Man Escaped, but with one-liners and just all this the macho delivery that Clint Eastwood and some of the rest
hands
of his
being chopped off brutally with hatchets.
Yeah, it's
the kind of choice Bresson wouldn't make.
exactly. But yeah, both amazing films. I mean, we recently kind of watched Escape from Alcatraz the first time, at least within the last year, and it's great. So yeah.
No, yeah, that was what inspired it. Jamie and I just decided to throw it on. We were like, we both never seen this before. There's a new restoration out. Maybe we should just watch it. And then we did. And I was like, within less than a year, we were like, this has to be an episode because, man, A Man Escaped is it's so It owes so much of what it's doing, especially in its second half when it just gets into, Clint Eastwood fashioning little makeshift escape tools and, little suspense sequences of him trying to like avoid the guards and overhearing them and things like that. And even if it's not as committed to the psychological perspective maybe as Bresson's is, where it's like all of the stuff in A Man Escaped where it's just locked into the prison cell with him and you literally can't see or hear anything that he wouldn't be able to see or hear while you're in the room with him. It's horrifying at times.
Yeah, definitely. Like with Escape from Alcatraz, there is a little bit more of that. You get an insight on kind of what's conspiring behind the scenes a little bit. And you're right. I think it is a little scarier to just be right in there with one cellmate and just get their focus on it. So yeah, they're highly recommend both.
Yeah, and like Jamie and I would hope all of you were taking some notes for any of you end up getting to prison. We basically just did like 3 documentary examples in a row on various ways to actually make your way out. So
you absolutely do need a spoon. We did learn that. That's the most important tool.
It's been an educational 2 weeks.
Yes.
But moving on to this week, we have a bit of an interesting episode because, as I'm sure most people can already tell by the title, this is a main feed episode without a guest. It's kind of a little bit of a rare occurrence on the show. Sometimes schedules just don't work out. Sometimes we have an episode that we want to program to meet a certain date, and that's kind of what's happening this week for us. So this is an episode that I've been thinking about kind of doing for a little bit because once again, I am at the Toronto International Film Festival, basically trying to watch as many movies in 10 days as is physically possible. And as always, every year, one of my favorite programs or sections of the festival is the Midnight Madness section, the section dedicated to genre movies and midnight movies by the programmer Peter Koplowski, who's friend of the show. He came on last year and talked about The Wrong Guy and Mute Witness with us, which was 2 films that actually played Midnight Madness and was a lot of fun to talk about. And Peter actually does for anyone in Toronto, Peter does a year-round screening series based on movies that have been played in the Midnight Madness program. And one of the ones that he played was a film called Freaked from 1993 by Alex Winter and Tom Stern, which he played on a film print. And I was like, I don't know what this is. I'm going to go check this out. And I was blown away by the fact that it was basically sort of like the Bill and Ted stoner comedy vibe that anyone who liked those films might like, because it came out directly due to the popularity of the first Bill and Ted film. But it was also like Winter and Stern got to throw in their own like punk rock MTV butthole surfer body horror sensibility into it and basically do their own remake of like Todd Browning's Freaks, and somehow got a studio budget to do that, which you can tell based on like the sets and makeup alone. And I saw that last year and I was fucking floored by it. And I was like, at some point we definitely have to talk about this on the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's you can just tell when you're watching it. Even my brothers and I, who are prone to loving weird things, were like, this is an incredibly strange film. So I imagine any producer that was on the set day to day was just thinking to themselves, what did I throw $12 million at? But I'm so glad that they did. It's one of the wackiest, craziest things I've ever seen. So...
Yeah, we can't even really get into details for anyone who hasn't seen it without like probably just confusing people off the jump. So we'll have to wait till we actually kind of get into it to start breaking down what it is. But I knew I wanted to talk about this, and I wasn't sure. Honestly, it's so unlike so many movies that I've ever seen before. I was like, I legitimately was struggling to come up with like, what would we even talk about that with? There were a couple things that I was floating around, but one idea I had was I was like, well, hey, that played, because Peter programmed it, I knew that played Midnight Madness in 1993, which means it's having its 30th anniversary this year, which is cool, especially too, because we'll talk about it, but the movie was a bit of a box office flop, and some of the main acclaim that it got was actually at the Midnight Madness screening that it had. Which is, I couldn't imagine being like the audience who, saw that before without knowing what it was for the first time at midnight in Toronto. It probably was fucking crazy.
Yeah, the vibes would have been off the charts for sure.
Yeah, so then I was like, well, I took a look at the rest of the 1993 slate. I was like, maybe I can find something else in here. And by total happenstance, there happened to be one other film in the 1993 Midnight Madness program that was similarly gleeful and animated and kind of gross and had some funhouse energy to it. And you know, it was basically a comedy that circled back around into being a horror film. And that film is this extremely underseen and bizarre Australian crime gone wrong thriller called Frauds, which only 400 people have logged this on Letterboxd, and it stars Phil Collins as a Pee-wee-esque evil man-child who basically just like loves cruel, elaborate, like Rube Goldberg style pranks that he plays on people, and he's also like a claims insurance investigator. Who it's just like it has so many wacky sets and again so many insane details that again I don't think I can really say much about it without just starting to confuse people. But if you love like 80s Tim Burton, this is maybe the closest I've seen anyone who's not Tim Burton get to that kind of level of sophisticated and childish like mania that he has visually speaking.
Yeah, no, 100%. One actually just did pop into my head that it kind of reminded me of the style, and I think a lot of people would have seen this, at least when they were kids, is Matilda. That
yes,
yeah,
very
it's got
much
a
so.
lot of the. We'll get to it, but it's got a lot of those like kind of gross close-ups and just unflattering zooms and things like that. So.
And one note about Matilda, speaking of the Burton connection, that is actually shot by Tim Burton's cinematographer from the era of doing like Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, it totally makes sense. And this film very much lines up with that. This one's even wackier though, like it's far crazier. So because there's even some adult themes that we'll get into as well, and some surprising violence. So yeah,
it's literally Phil Collins playing pranks on Hugo Weaving and his wife,
trying to ruin their lives
in Australia. And it's very, very visually intense. And I was, quite surprised that, again, I like when we do on the show sometimes where just by total happenstance, we happen to find something that like under 1,000 people have logged it. And this is an insane one. You'll want to stick around to hear about it. Cause I honestly, we did it as the virtual screening for the $10 patrons, and even describing it live, we were kind of hysterically laughing. We were like, this is this is ridiculous, just describing the plot that's unfolding right in front of us. So that is the uniting factor of the double feature this week for sure. But that being said, I think we are going to jump right into it here. Let's kick things off. Let's get started with Freaked.
Always wanted to do.
Oh.
Introducing Larry Bud Melman as the President of the United States.
What's the matter? Afraid of a little rock stuff?
In Freaked, coming soon to a theater. Freaked, but ugly, but funny.
Welcome to show business, morons!
All right, we are talking Freaked, the 1993 American absurdist comedy sci-fi body horror film written and directed by Alex Winter, Tom Stern, and co-written by Tim Burns, and obviously starring Alex Winter alongside a Randy Quaid and Megan Ward and a ton of other sort of like small comic sort of like cameo performances from Bobcat Goldthwait, John Hawkes, Brooke Shields, Mr. T, and even a very subtle one by Winter's Bill and Ted co-star Mr. Keanu Reeves, which we will talk about because it's very fun. Now, as I mentioned, I saw this about a year ago on a 35mm print as part of Peter Kaplowski's monthly Midnight Madness program, where he actually had Tim Burns in person there for the Q&A and had Tom Stern phone in on the big screen. So the history of this one is quite interesting. Alex Winter, previously, obviously, we've covered him on Bill and Ted, which he is hilarious in, and that second one especially is the one that we covered on the show because of the insane levels of like production design and like set pieces. Or they're like straight up going to hell and hanging out with William Sadler as Death, who also makes his way back into this film as well. But Alex Winter went to NYU, which is where he met Tom Stern, who's a fellow film student with him. And one of the things that Peter actually played before the screening was their short film called The Squeal of Death, which was this like 16 millimeter sort of like absurdist comedy horror short, one that was very heavily inspired by kind of like Sam Raimi. And it was all about like a freakishly obsessive cinephile who thinks he's in like a noir film. And either way, that actually, they kind of shopped that around to people the same way that Sam Raimi did. And people were, got kind of interested in it. And it actually got them kind of like some music video gigs into the mid-late 80s. And that and the connection plus the success of Bill and Ted in 1989 got them this short-lived half-hour sketch comedy show that some people might have heard of on MTV called The Idiot Box, which is basically where they first started working with the other co-writer Tim Burns. And it was the show very obviously inspired by kind of like Monty Python sketch comedy, like parts of this too even reminded me of stuff like Meaning of Life. There's a big vomit gag in it, which we'll talk about. But also things like Tim Burns especially was going crazy at the Q&A talking about like Mad Magazine and the Zucker brothers and all this stuff they just kind of grew up devouring and thinking were hilarious and just constantly coming up with jokes all the time. And so that mixed with the 90s MTV culture and a little bit of the kind of sort of like punkish rock, experimental noise rock attitude that those guys kind of had, that they
kind of that
crude
they were art too, like a lot of almost like melting faces or overblown makeup and just grotesque kind of vibes. Yeah,
turning it into something that's like very like psychedelic and anarchic. They were really into the band Butthole Surfers, who actually did the soundtrack for this film as a result. And apparently the show was just like pure slapstick, like parody insanity. They did like fake commercials and shows, some of which actually makes its way into this movie. And they constantly tried to find a like, particularly violent and kind of grotesque angle to stuff. And as a result, they only recorded about 6 episodes or so of that show before the executives started getting concerned about it. And they basically took a lot of the comedic ideas they came up with at it, and they took it over to Fox instead, because they were like, hey, we have a good idea. So they pitched Fox Studios somehow on this like vulgar 90s weirdo punk rock thing. They would be like, if you want to get kids interested, if you want to get like people who the MTV kids who are really into like Ren and Stimpy and shit like that. If you want to get those kids into, I can get their butts in seats. And whatever Fox executive was there was like $12 million. Give it to them. They have this pitch called The Hideous Mutant Freaks, spelled with a Z, and it was functionally like...
I rarely say this, but I really love whatever producer that was that went, this deserves the $12 million. He just like smoked a J off break or something like that, and he was ready to go. I love it.
Well, it's hilarious because functionally they pitched him on the Todd Browning movie Freaks, complete with the circus freak show setting, but like again done in this very grotesque comic style that this very sort of like post-punk confrontational thing that they had, and it ends up being this movie about this this sort of proprietor mad scientist Elijah C. Scruggs, played by Randy Quaid, who transforms these unsuspecting tourists into these man-made mutants using this biogenetic fertilizer, one of which is including Alex Winter playing this guy named Ricky Coogan, who is the this very sort of like self-centered Los Angeles actor. And when they pitched this to the studio executive, apparently he was like, as long as you can like avoid the R and like push the PG-13 as far as you can take it, he was like, I'll get you like an advertising deal, I'll get you like a toy deal, like we'll do all of this kind of stuff, which unfortunately all fell through because Rupert Murdoch over at Fox fired that studio executive.
Damn it.
And during the post-production of the film, and replaced him with a guy who like fucking just hated their concept and was like, why are we making this? Some like stiff suit guy. And they were doing test screenings of the film, film that weren't doing well. And so he totally cut their post-production budget. He made them cut like 15 to 20 minutes out of the movie. He totally screwed their distribution and marketing to the point where they essentially killed the film's theatrical release, because it was supposed to be a wide release movie, which is insane to think about watching it. But it only ended up playing in 2 theaters in the United States after generating some acclaim, including at the Toronto Film Festival. And
didn't it only make like $6,000 or something like that?
Yeah, brutal. It is a $12 million budget. Like the total box office gross of this film was $30,000.
Yeah, that's got to be one of the biggest blunders, no? Just in the sense of like scale there. That's crazy.
It's got to be up there. Now, I would hope that Fox maybe gave it some sort of like video release, and it maybe found like a cult video release following after the fact. I don't really know the numbers on all of that, but this movie deserved a lot better, because when I saw this, man, I loved this. Like, it was it was so evident just on a purely filmic, like even just like a textual level of what they made. The money's on the screen. It is consistently inventive and chaotic in terms of its visual style. It's very, this is part of those kinds of films that I talk about on the show that I really like, where it's like, I have affection for movies that are made by genuine outsiders and quote unquote freaks who just for some reason get a chance to run the asylum and go crazy with their weird sensibilities and obsessions, and even like incorporate that into the story, where it's all about these weirdos and outcasts who are like overthrowing some like corporate attempt to squash them or something like that. Like, the movie this most reminded me of that we've covered on the show is actually UHF, the Weird Al like sort of sketch comedy movie that's all about wacky absurdity and like, what would the freaks do if they got a chance to run a TV channel, and what would that look like? And functionally,
it has kind of that consistent,
this is very similar.
There's a plot, like a centralized plot to focus on, but a lot of the stuff in between that can be anywhere from connecting to a character and also just completely random, just trying to make you laugh, which this has.
Oh my god, yeah, you can fucking tell that this is just a bunch of friends like throwing every stupid ambitious gag they could possibly come up with at the wall and seeing if it sticks or not, and that's going to work for people or not, because there's some, there's a couple jokes in here that, even at a live screening with a bunch of diehard fans, which by the way, I mentioned this in my review, but there was an entire theater row at my screening filled with milkmen. So like, that's how crazy, and they were awesome. Committed. They were full dressed up. They had all of the props and everything. Like, so people, there are hardcore fans of this, and you understand why, because it got such a shameful, it got treated so shamefully for what it is. But, also there's like an extended joke in this about like the Bob Villa, like home improvement guy, like a reference joke that even in a room full of audience diehards, everyone was kind of like, who? Like, what? Like, it just, so there's some elements of this that don't necessarily play to a modern audience, but there's still some stuff that is like, I think, universal.
Yeah, and I do think that even the things that you don't quite get, because it's based on more of the era, like the celebrities of the era maybe, I think the joke still lands, because just the idea of like him having a tour as this newly found freak to, the kind of the freak show grounds and everything, and having that guy just pop up and be like, you know what you really could do to bring out some more sunlight in here. I think like the joke still lands, but yeah, I agree the specificity of it is a little bit too obscure nowadays, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. Reference humor always kind of dates itself a little bit, even for people who are maybe even like caught up on the era. Like, there's still some funny stuff in here. Like, there's a reference to Brooke Shields, like a Blue Lagoon 2, that kind of maybe made me chuckle. But the stuff that really works about this, and the stuff that really like that they threw at the wall and did stick, is just the absolute like sort of like monster movie insanity of it all. Crazy throwaway physical gags, giant Uzi wielding eyeball guards, which we'll talk about, but like even just having like a full-on like straight out of Zucker Brothers Airplane, like a kid getting sucked out of an airplane and falling on farmland like a dummy. Like, it's that's the kind of comedy that no matter, there's stuff in here that's very specific to 90s weirdos that was meant to horrify horrify the parents of the era, especially some of the like grotesque body horror and gooey creature effects, because we'll get into a lot of the specifics of it because there's a ton of makeup to talk about. But as soon as you see the names Screaming Mad George in the vomit textured like stop motion credits of the movie, you're like, yeah, that's the guy who did Big Trouble in Little China, guy who did Nightmare on Elm Street 3, the guy who did Society. So you kind of know what you're in for.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, this is the kind of movie that one of the main jokes with that kid is just abusing that kid over and over and over and over again. I find that to be absolutely hilarious, and they kind of make him a more, like a cartoonish character. He's got these big glasses, and they even put, I think, anyway, I hope I'm not insulting the child here, but they put these like giant prosthetic ears on him as well, just to make
Apparently that was unfortunately also his actual ears, so we are just ripping on this child.
Well, we are just ripping on this child. Well, I apologize
to be fair to him, I think he's incredible. He looks exactly like, he was cast because he looks exactly like the ginger kid from Mad Magazine, like the glasses,
absolutely.
The ears, the teeth, like
absolutely.
He's the whole package.
We'll apologize for the ears, but kid, you were well casted. You nailed it. So I mean, yeah, no hate whatsoever. I think he's honestly he's like top 3 funniest characters in this entire thing, and it is legitimately like a 12-13-year-old kid just giving it his all in every scene. So I mean, hats off to him.
Also, the ears do look ridiculous. I'm not sure I believe them that they are real, but apparently
I honestly thought from a side profile at one point, because I was looking at them to see if they added anything to the kid and anything, and it seemed like they had those kind of, you could almost see the almost seams of the glue or whatever from the skin, but hey, whatever, it's all good. The kid's talented.
Yeah, but definitely you can tell that like these guys are, like they're already self-confessed fans of Sam Raimi. You can feel a little bit of that in some of the, sort of grotesque visual mania that they come up with. But also, I haven't seen them talk a whole lot about it, but they have to be fans of like Peter Jackson, early Peter Jackson. This reminds me almost of his splatter movie era, something like Bad Taste. Yeah. There's a lot of shared sensibility too, especially in the very like deranged, hyperactive kind of nonsense sense of humor. Like there's stuff in here that's stupid, but they lean into it with so much commitment, like formally, that I have to just like respect it on some level. But yeah, and anyone who's into like transgressive comedy or like punk rock prankster vulgarity and energy, like this is as extreme and offensive as you could probably be in the 90s while maintaining a PG-13 budget and getting studio money to do absurd makeup and sets and elaborately staged set pieces and stuff.
Yeah, and everybody is on the same page here, which is great, and you can just tell. It seems like whoever was doing the makeup, the directing, the writing, I mean, a lot of the writing and directing is coming from the same people, so it's definitely a vision that they had. But like every single person from Alex Winter to Randy Quaid to obviously the freaks themselves have this very, very cartoonish, exaggerated performance to them, where not only are they doing huge, grotesque close-ups on their faces a lot of the time, but they're contorting their faces whenever Rick, the character that Alex Winter is playing, is doing, he's saying something smug. He has just the most disgusting and huge smile on his face, and
it's like a smirking caricature, making the kind of faces out of like Zoolander or something.
Yes, exactly. Like this is parody through and through, even down to the performances. And even when they're doing, more trying to have the sentimental, serious moment of the film, like when, two characters are going through the freak transformation or something, it's still built for comedy and kind of a crudeness. And it's incredibly consistent the entire runtime, and I love that. The commitment is great.
Yeah, and it's like it's 80 minutes. Like right off the start, you get a stop motion like psychedelic claymation, like vomit looking credits of just things like forming into faces. The Butthole Surfers are just being like freaked. You know?
And even the 80 minutes kind of goes, in my opinion, I don't know if it was because it was cut up to ship from the studio eventually, that would kind of make sense in a way, but I think the runtime really works well because it has that kind of punk rock attitude. Like most punk songs are 2 minutes, 3 minutes maximum. It's very fast and kind of out of there, and this feels like that. Like there's no fat on this thing whatsoever. The plot moves like crazy. on purposely, and so you don't really have time to really think about a lot of the nonsense that keeps being thrown at you. You just have to really embrace it and enjoy it. Very much like a punk rock
and even
song.
the framework is so like loosely established, like this idea of the whole movie is like essentially one long flashback told by Ricky Coogan, played by Alex Winter, and he's supposed to be this very sort of self-centered, like, you know, smug, sort of former adorable child star who's just now like an LA asshole actor, essentially.
And he's basically being hired only for, it seems like, commercials and kind of trademark, like he's advertising items all the time. He seems like a soulless actor instead of someone that's really trying to become an artist.
Yeah, and the frame show, or the framework, is that he's going on this like live talk show hosted by Brooke Shields, and he's silhouetted in order to hide what is this, like, you know, this shadow of clearly some sort of monster. And she's talking about, tell us your story about your disfigurement that made, you know, kids previously who were in love with you now like shriek in terror. And he starts telling this story, and it begins with him accepting this $5 million sponsorship contract from William Sadler and his evil, imposing boardroom of the mega conglomerate known as EES, or Everything Except Shoes. And even the logo is like a crossed out shoe in it. They were like, we refuse to sell shoes. Yeah, which has an incredible body horror gag payoff at the end of the film.
Yes. Yes.
But this boardroom is filled with these like old men puppets that he literally like levers around with a little controller. They have like little strings on their hands that he like Pinocchio puppet styles them to vote for all the choices that he wants to do.
They also, like, throughout the film, they have to move them to certain places and stuff. So they'll be shown like chairs, but they're strapped to the chairs and they're falling over and things. They're basically just like dead old men that they control. It's very funny.
Yes, and they are trying to promote this very controversial toxic fertilizer that William Sadler argues to Ricky Coogan that it will save America's struggling farmlands, and it's called Zygrant 24. And he's like, look, Ricky, we need you to defend our country from these radical environmentalists who are ruining this country. And he's like, you know, I heard that shit's been banned, man. He's like, you know, only in the US and Europe. And to dissuade him, they're doing these things because you know, you can tell that Ricky's like, I don't know, man, this sounds dangerous, this sounds weird, and they're offering $2 million, and they're like, we hear you, Ricky. $5 million. You know, they're making this pitch to him that, you know, will you sell your soul to the devil for money? Essentially, and he travels to Santa Flan to sell these chemicals. And you know, Alex Winter, he really does get to play up how much of just an asshole LA actor that nobody would ever want to be around he is. He's cruel to his friends. He's evading his super fan, this kid who we were talking about, called Stewie Gluck, who even the kid is like, I don't recognize you anymore, Ricky. You know, and everyone's tearing up because they're like, man, you've totally sold your soul, man. He's like, don't worry, kid. Deep down, I'm still good. And he even does like that like animated voice with it and everything. Yeah. It's Alex Winter, you know,
good. Like, yeah,
writing and directing and starring in this. Like, this is just pure his sensibility, and he nails it. I really wish he got to do this more often in his career.
No, I totally agree. Like, having seen Bill and Ted, where he's kind of doing almost, which is interesting because he's exaggerated in Bill and Ted, but this one he's doing it 10 times more. And I think it's absolutely brilliant and hilarious to watch. And I love that even those scenes too, like where they kind of have some recognition of his characterization, they undercut it immediately by abusing the small child by hitting him with a cart and letting Ricky just kind of smile and go on with his day and not think about it any longer.
Yeah, literally laugh out loud at the kid being thrown out of the airplane via the like escape hatch and then like falling to his death onto a farm. But obviously this is an incredibly absurd movie, so the kid doesn't die. He just lands and he goes, hey, I'm okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I also love that they partner him up. Like, one of his friends is just a total like pervert. So I just enjoy the the commentary of like the asshole rich Ricky actor guy, and then his confidant, his best friend is a total pervert that's just along for the ride. I'm like, that's Hollywood right there, baby. That's what it is.
He has so many jokes about his Rodney. When we eventually get to the section where they start turning them into monsters, I love that his friend Ernie, played by Michael Stoyanov, his line is, "Yo, could you give me a bigger Rodney?" And they were like, I forget what he says too. He's like, "I'm not a miracle worker, kid," you know?
Yeah. And I think he's introduced with like literally the first frame he gets in is he's got a hand prop in his pants and he's just smacking women around with it. Like that's the introduction to this character. So
yeah, and it's one of those movies that fits so many absurd gags into it so fast. It's actually hard to like catalog them. Like, yes, I was actually having a hard time taking notes watching this because you want to just sit there and enjoy it and like enjoy the gags, but you actually have to pause it to be like, man, that was a complex gag for a 5-second like throwaway thing. And they find it in every single kind of shot. This is one of my favorite things that like what does separate, in my opinion, the best comedies from mediocre comedies is even finding jokes in the stuff that other people wouldn't be able to find jokes in. And there's one great example in this plane sequence when the kid falls out of the plane. They're landing in this, Santa Flan, this fake Latin American country. And in another comedy, especially a studio one, there's a very typical second unit shot that happens in this film of the plane landing. And you would see this in every movie. It's establishing they're in a new country. The text comes up saying where they are. It's a very meat and potatoes kind of shot that you include because you need to put it there so that the audience follows that they have landed. They know where they are. They're grounded, literally. The way that this movie does it is it starts with them doing voiceover about all of like the hot sex they're about to have now that they've landed in this amazing country. And the second unit shot is of the plane landing. The text comes up saying we're in Santa Flan, and then it just explodes on impact. And you're like, briefly, you're like, what? That's not the way that you would film like an intense explosion shot. And then it literally like whip pans over to them, and they're like, wow, glad we weren't on that plane because it was the plane that landed right after them.
Yeah, and it's one of those films too that it's like because it's so fast and it's constantly moving. Like we said, with credits too, this is about like 75 minutes, really, this movie.
Yes.
And right away, as soon as they make that joke, he looks up and there you go. You see the next co-star, which is the Megan Ward, I believe. And,
Julie, who's playing one of the radical environmentalists who is protesting EES and Ricky Coogan already at the country. So then he has to like disguise himself as an incredibly injured, bandaged man to like fall into her arms and be like, oh, help me, Miss Protester. I also hate Ricky Coogan and EES.
And this is 20 seconds after the gag you just saw. And then pretty much immediately after that, they decide to go on the road together. And then I would say probably a minute later, it's revealed that it's Ricky and that he's not in a body cast, and then they start to fight. Like,
he gets so angry that she says that she likes Christian Slater as an actor better than Ricky Coogan that he has to be like, oh, fuck you. Like,
he has to reveal himself and expose himself for being a weird perv. That's what I'm saying. This is within a 3-minute span. Like, it's just crazy how much information is constantly doled out to you while doing gags and just keeping the whole story moving. And it's incredibly fast paced. One of the most fast paced movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, this is one of those things that does really work for comedy, where some of the best sitcom writers have always kind of talked about this too, that sometimes when you are limited to fitting into like a 23-minute slot or 22-minute slot with commercials, like you are forced to just mile a minute, gag a minute. You are forced to, really just push your best stuff into as tight of a package as possible. And I do think that, there's probably some stuff that was cut from this that it sucked that the studio made them do that. But also, there's part of me that goes, man, would it have the same kind of exhausting pacing that it has as a result? Would I literally be like almost like, some people I think say that it's so fast and exhausting they actually don't laugh at it that much because it doesn't even leave them room to breathe or to laugh at it. Sure. And to me that's not really a flaw. That's just it. I'm literally laughing like the entire time. Like this is a I am smiling watching it almost basically the entire time, and the gags are so chock full and sometimes interacting with each other, and you have a gag inside of another gag or something like that. Like it's really, really ridiculous, and it basically really kicks in on their drive when they start seeing those billboards for this Elijah Z. Scruggs local sideshow circus freak show called Freakland, and it has a billboard for the human worm and a billboard for the dog boy, and you can tell the amount of money they spent on this. Like, they built those billboards, man. Like, it's I wish I could have one.
Every single set seems completely built from scratch, because
even the Freakland set, that huge crane shot as they pull up with the neon sign, and like the giant spinning like Randy Quaid head that they have. I hope Randy Quaid owns that and keeps it in his house.
Oh hell yeah, that would be amazing, right in his backyard. Even like small things, like when they're approaching the freaked area and they see the big sign that says freaks, and it's like pointing this way. The camera then does a huge like 10-second zoom into a small place in the corner where it's like trademarking the certain like the copyright of freaks or whatever, and it's just it's just another example of like, it could have been a simple establishing shot of just like, you're here. We've already made the billboard joke, but no, they just add another little thing where even the camera is a part of it, where it zooms in and it takes the time to actually zoom and not just cut to it. It's great.
Yeah, and I love this whole introduction to Quaid, where they show up and they're like, hey, this place is kind of dead and it's kind of like lame and rinky-dink. Like, where are the fucking weirdos? And Randy Quaid just like bursts out of his shed. He's like, no weirdos here. We got mutants, we got genetic nightmares, we got like children from hell, twisted masses of living, breathing, tormented flesh, certainly, but no weirdos. And he's like this mix of like carny proprietor, but also like mad scientist, and immediately they're insulting him. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, you just seem like a regular old dumb shit redneck to me, as he's like creepily inviting them into his private show in his rusty shed. And I love that in order to, be less of an asshole than Ricky is, like Julie has to be like, we would love to see your freak show. I understand that you don't traffic in misery. You just show us a side of ourselves that we don't want to look at. You've built a monument to the variety and the innovation of nature. And it's funny. Like, it's just like, obviously they are trying to, like make fun of her politics a little bit, but at the same time, they are just 100% capturing what they're doing with the movie sensibility as well, being like, look at the level of creativity and innovation that goes into something just absolutely fucking repulsive. There's another line later in the film that really gets at this too, where Ricky is like, I've been in show business all my life. The public does not want to see disgusting, depraved, violent filth. And like, this movie is like literally a counterpoint to these lines and being like, look at this fucking crazy shit. Because as it turns out, he doesn't just exhibit this freak show. He uses his Tasty Freaks machine to inject people with this controversial fertilizer, Zygrot 24, and realize the human flesh into this bizarro artistic vision of his. And at one point, he describes it as, imagine Kevin Costner, but he's a peach grub who can fart Blue Dano. What's
interesting too is watching him like be so incredibly excited about every single time he freaks anybody. Like even the line before he does it, he's like, who wants to get freaked first? Like that kind of thing. Yeah. And he's just so excited about it. And, you're supposed to be, in a sense, worried for the characters, but because of the absolutely wacky tone, and how you kind of know, because you've seen like the Toad Man at this point, that the makeup is going to be pretty awesome. And that is that's a small taste when you see the Toad Man compared to what you see with like the worm guy, the dog boy. Oh yeah. The it's cow. Crazy. What they turn Alex Winter into. But you as an audience member are like just as excited as Randy, because you're kind of like, this is bad for these main characters, but I cannot wait to see all this just grotesquerie on screen ready to go. So that's kind of fun too. You're kind of a part of their transformation in that sense. You want to see it.
The goopy like pastel colored like acid that he's like rubbing on them to turn. He turns Julie and Ernie into a conjoined twins, though not briefly before turning them into a giant Gumby that masturbates.
Yeah.
which speaks to a giant Gumby
like,
masturbating.
It is the actual model of Gumby and everything like that. So
it's 100% Gumby.
They got away with
that's
that
almost
one.
like a Ralph Bakshi joke. That's like the kind of thing that he would do in his the way that he tried to use like the Disney characters and shit like that.
Totally.
Where it was almost like, how can I just like use these things people know of in a different context and just make them disgusting? But he turns Elijah into a half reptilian hunchback, like goopy guy, because he runs out of Zygrot halfway through transforming him, and he calls him the Beast Boy. And the makeup effects on his like half Beast Boy appearance, where he has like green juice that will just squirt out of his forehead. And Winter's physicality at doing these almost like cavemen style like runs, like he's like an ape or something like that. And
he kind of leans over to one side, and it's interesting too because you can tell the prosthetic takes over like not even half, it's like 3/4 of his mouth, to the point where I think they had to ADR the majority of his dialogue, because you can even tell sometimes when he's delivering lines, the dude can barely open his mouth because the prosthetics are so heavy on his face. They're so good, but they seem incredibly heavy and kind of complicated.
Those creature
to use.
effects, once again, screaming Mad George the God, but also Steve Johnson also worked on these too, who's the guy who did Dead Heat. So you have like a pretty amazing crew, and supposedly most of this $12 million budget did basically go to pulling off these visual effects and set pieces, and you can't tell, like it's crazy. Like, it's so disgusting looking at Alex Winter that Julie and Ernie literally have this extended spray hose vomit gag where they are conjoined twins in the full outfit, like split down the middle and everything, and on both sides they're just vomiting out in response to him. And Alex Winter's just like, man, I wonder if they're still casting for Gremlins 3, you know, like maybe I could get a role in that. And then he meets obviously all the other incredible makeup effect creatures and all the other unlucky mutants, including one Ortiz, the dog boy, played by Keanu Reeves, who I can't remember exactly why, but he is uncredited in this for some sort of contractual reason. So he wasn't allowed to promote the movie or be included on the poster or anything like that, but he's in a decent amount of the movie and very, very committed. Like, they said at the Q&A that he was in that makeup, and he was really in that makeup every day. He was on set, hours in that chair getting put in that makeup, and he was a trooper, and he really did it. And Keanu is like ridiculous in this role, full out. Like, his foot will just come into frame so that he can like scratch his fleas. He spends half the movie chasing a squirrel.
He's very committed to this like funny kind of, I don't even know, it's like an Eastern European accent or something like that. And and just has a ton, even with all the makeup, has a ton of like facial stretching and kind of just a really good facial contorted performance that he puts on and everything like that. He's very committed. I appreciate it so much. Loves his buddy Alex Winters.
Yes, and he introduces us as the leader of the Freaks to through like a movie trivia game show where he's asking questions about Exorcist 2, which is just a random gag. He introduces us to the rest of the Freaks, who is the Nosy the Nose Man, who is just a guy with a prosthetic nose like that's bigger than his skull. He's just sneezing all the time. You have Cow a Boy, who is an anthropomorphic, what looks like an animatronic like cow costume, apparently played by John Hawkes, is apparently in there, which is funny. You have the bearded lady, who's played by Mr. T, which is such a like a limited cameo gag that I'm very curious why he even accepted it, but it is funny. He's pretty committed to it for the moments that he gets on screen,
and he does make he gets like funny jokes too, where like they'll randomly cut to him doing hair and just being like, just have fun with it, like that kind of thing. And it's ripped Mr. T. So I did kind of like
because it's suggested that like the guy like basically forced him to like switch his gender, but he's actually like pretty happy in it, is kind of the joke. He's actually like, he's actually like he's like, I like being a woman. You know, I find this an enjoyable existence, actually, and my beard looks great, you know, like, but you also get introduced to Sockhead, who is this like dirty sock hand puppet cookie monster who is hilarious. There's that incredible gag when he's doing his performance and someone like pulls the sock off and it's just a third hand underneath, and everyone goes, "Hey, he doesn't have a sock for a head. He's a hand." And everyone just like literally
they're booing. It's so funny that it's still like an insane mutation, but they're like, that's not what we fucking paid for.
Exactly.
It's so funny.
You know, this movie is also, because it's like such a delightful zany whiplash between high and lowbrow humor. It is not against a recurring extended fart gag by a guy called the Eternal Flame, who most of his jokes are just he's sitting in the background of a scene and you can hear him farting through the entire scene. That's literally like the only reason he's in the movie.
That's his entire characterization. I love it.
Yeah. So to just throw that in between like what is also a pretty gruesome satire on like Hollywood's relationship to corporate America and like outsourced environmental destruction, which is, you know, still in the movie as well. So it's just, you know, like it's very funny to have a gag like that. You also have Rosie the Pinhead, who is just
yells,
does a lounge, just yells. She gets introduced to do a lounge singing routine that's just her screaming and whacking her head with the mic. There's the Frog Man, who's just a guy in a scuba suit, and I can't remember. I have a feeling they mentioned in the Q&A that this guy was like meant to be a bigger like post-production effect, and they got cut of money, so they just left it in, and they thought it was hilarious because he's just a guy in a scuba suit or something. Funny.
It kind of reminded me of, in fact, I can only think of this one example, but I've been seeing it more in like modern comedy, where if they have a group, there's always just this like one normal guy compared to everyone else. Like Deadpool 2 did it. And I think a couple others that I've seen, I just can't remember the exact examples, but it was that made me think of that. The moment they cut to the guy in the scuba suit and he's like one of the only normal looking guys and they never really go back to him at all. I thought that was very funny.
Yeah, and all of the makeup on these characters for the most part, but especially like Dog Boy, Nosy, the human worm is like particularly incredible. Like that guy is just fully in that giant worm suit, and he's nerdy, he's got the glasses, he's kind of like the older guy. The guy who his backstory was that he like legit studied worms and was like an academic, and then he ironically got turned into one. And that's one of the funny things. They keep doing these flashbacks where they're like, well, that makes sense. You know, like that's what a crazy, evil, mad scientist would do. He'd be like, oh, you want to be a worm, eh? You like worms, huh? You know, but the other stories are so funny where it's like the guy where it's Sockhead and he's just like, yeah, I met the guy and now I have a sock for a head. And he's like, I'm sorry, I don't tell stories very well. or the cutaway to the hammer and it's just literally like the hammer, and it goes into a wordless flashback where he was like, previously I was a wrench, you know, and he was so happy as a wrench.
Yeah, like it's incredible. Also, just the fact that they know that some of the makeup effects in itself are just funny. Like the sock guy is very hilarious. So what they do just in his look, because he's got a very normal human body. Of a dude that's like pretty tall, it seems too, like a 6'3", 6'4" kind of guy. But then he just has that skinny sock head, and they'll do these like close cut-ups of him reacting to things. And because it's the sock head, and they have just like googly eyes glued onto him and a little tongue, that's the reaction shot that you get, and it makes me laugh every fucking time. It's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, well, that's just it. The gags really just start to accumulate because some of them are throwaway and they're just random and they happen on the side. Some of them, it's like, no, it's funny every time you cut back to Sockhead. It's fun, and everything that ends up happening with him is great. And I think that's something that will work for people or it won't, because every once in a while the movie is totally committed to derailing itself for a stupid joke, even for like a few seconds. Like it will just be like that one when they're being turned into the monsters, and they're like, hey, you're not supposed to have those chemicals, like that's illegal, you know? And he's like, yeah, well, what about these? And it's just like this crazy Dutch angle push in on him holding like Ramada Inn towels, because he stole towels from the Ramada Inn, you know? and like the movie will literally derail itself for 3 seconds to throw in a gag like that. And for me, I found that incredibly charming, because in certain ways, that's the heart of the movie. Like the visual and physical gag within a subplot is what you maybe would try to come to this movie for. Like when the subplot about Stewie, who forms a telepathic connection with Ricky over the course of the film and comes back in the climax to kind of save the day. But early on, he's just like this floating nuisance near Ricky's head. And, he keeps trying to like swat him away like he's like a fly or something. And you have Cowboy being like, hey man, don't turn away your soul, mate. Lots of us freaks got ESP. Nosy can smell the future. Sockhead's got ESPN. And he's just watching sports. Just cut away to him watching sports. But the throwaway gags in this sort of telepathic connection where it goes to Stewie's perspective is it's like, all the movie memorabilia of the alternate reality of the superfan, where like Ricky, he has a poster of Rain Man and RoboCop, but starring Ricky. When he tries to break the story to the various newspapers in LA, and it's like
favorite gag maybe.
Yeah, he's like, Ricky Coogan is a mutant in South America, and he goes to like the LA Times, he goes to USA Today, and it just turns into a montage of him being thrown through frosted glass windows or doors every time, where it's just like, I'll show myself the door, boom, and you just see a kid literally fly through a fucking window. Like this stunt kid, man.
Oh yeah, it's unreal. That was probably my favorite gag, because like I said, they've done the whole like they've been abusing this kid the entire runtime, but to watch him like 5 times in a row get sent through glass is unbelievably funny. And I do like that they just accented at the end by having him learn that that's how you are supposed to just leave a newspaper company. So he throws himself through the last pane of glass. I was losing it. That was one of my favorite moments in the whole thing. And again, that kid is committed. I don't know. I can't remember actually if it shows him getting up and it was actually the kid that went through it every once in a while. But regardless, it's such a funny bit.
Yeah, no, it's great, because he's trying to break the news on that, Ricky Coogan is now a mutant being held, prisoner at this cavalcade of atrocities and monstrosities, and being forced to, be a tap dancing performer. It's kind of like that section of Pinocchio when he gets turned into a slave. Yeah. For entertainment. But the actual performance section of this I like as well, because it's that bit where the worm is basically telling him, you must turn your hardship into inspiration, Ricky. You're an actor. Your body is your instrument, which is such a great line to include in like a body horror film. It's something Cronenberg also believes too, is like the body is expressive. The body says something about you. And he was like, you must play your body like, your tragic symphony for the world. And so everyone else's show are just like these, like, what you would see at like a sideshow. It's all these routines where all the audiences are just paying to laugh at these freaks. And then he goes up and he performs Richard III to a tearful, roaring audience. And there's like there's like the translation for dummies who don't understand Shakespeare. There's literally subtitles beneath it being like, I'm ugly, I never get laid, doing this kind of that, and everyone's cheering up and being like, oh my God, this is incredible.
I love that it's not a stretched out moment either. Like he does the whole Shakespeare paragraph, and the only 2 translations are literally that. It's just, I am ugly, I never get laid. That's fantastic. I also like that the first time they show the professor of Oxford, and he's like, we have put subtitles so that you can understand for the layman or whatever. And then later on, when he's doing actually more ridiculous things, like a part of the riot and everything, they still pop up his title, like Oxford Professor or whatever.
Yeah. It's incredible, especially during the big finale when it pops up and he's sitting there being like, kill him. Like he's there enjoying like the crazy monster wrestling show at that point. He's literally, this is the movie saying like, we are going to convince people who are only into highbrow art to turn into that guy, to be like, let's fucking go, let's see this fucking crazy shit. Because when it explodes, man, it explodes, because you get this crazy gremlin looking dude performing Shakespeare. in a club where a guy in a corner is making out with a goat. So you get crazy, wacky images like that. And he does anticipate that his corporation, the Everything Except Shoes, is going to come and save him at some point. But instead they show up and the guy goes, dude, you're kind of ugly now. Like, we don't actually want you for this endorsement deal because, you're not actually going to, sell this message of, even though he was literally directly harmed by the product he was supposed to be endorsing. And he gets so angry at this that he decides to go on like a violent rampage. And the bit, man, where this gets gory and he tears the head off of the corporate suit. Yeah. He literally throws it into the lens where it explodes blood all over the lens. And previously, what was like this performance, where everyone was kind of well behaved, is suddenly a chaotic, bloody massacre of people stomping on each other, people impaling each other. That dude who, the one protester guy, who he's a throwaway gag in the protest shot because he is the guy who shows up where he's got the I like Ike, which is like a sign for Eisenhower. So he's been in the protest movements for long enough that he has an Eisenhower sign, and he gets literally like gutted through like his torso and out his back with it, and he's literally gushing blood everywhere, and it's one like 3-second shot. Like just the commitment to establishing this guy's character and then the gruesome payoff for this character. Like he's probably on screen for like 10 to 15 seconds. Yeah. And it pays off.
Yeah, but they connect the shots so well that you still remember him being there. So when you see him the next time and he's just... And the thing is, too, I love the physical performance they went with, how they directed him, because he just kind of sits there while he's impaled and everyone is just chaotically running around him and screaming their faces off. It's so... like absurd and violent.
It's literally like
and
splatter
calming.
Movie Looney Tune.
yeah. It's so funny. It's that was one of my favorite gags too. I actually wrote that one down. That one was great.
Yeah, that one was great. And I also love that old guy with the video camera who I think they were trying to make the gag that he's like a pornographer or something because he's looking at this chaos and he's going, what's the matter? You all afraid of a little rough stuff? Like, welcome to show business. And he comes back later for another gag line where he's like, I haven't seen a stampede like this since the opening night of Ishtar, which is a gag for like 10 people. Like people who are really into
like
Elaine May.
Unpopular film, like people.
That was a box office bomb and kind of killed Elaine May's career, unfortunately. Like this is just such a random line to give to him, and just the crazy zooms that they're doing with the cameras, the crane shots that they're doing. Winter screaming and spraying goo out of his head. Elijah Scruggs just like yelling, "Now that's entertainment,"
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think this is when they decide, because this is kind of the it propels him to make the decision to try to leave, which results in the amazing milkman gag that I laughed so hard at. Like, so he's trying to he's trying to escape, and he crashes, and the milk truck that he's in, and he runs into the rest of the gang, and it's all the freaks, and they're all dressed up as milkmen as well. And like they had the same idea, they were in sync. And my favorite line is when he's just like, 12 is plausible, 13 is too many.
Yeah, Keanu chews that line. He's like, 12 milkmen, that's plausible, 13 is just silly,
It's so good. And just the visual the whole time, because they actually take this conversation kind of seriously because they're, trying to escape, and they've established that this is a dangerous place for them and all of that. But the whole time you're just looking at 13
which by the way
freaks.
they did because Ricky has the first idea of trapping the milkman in a trapdoor, stealing his outfit, and making his way off the property in the milkman outfit, like in disguise. But he gets caught by the giant Rastafarian eyeball henchmen who are wearing Uzis and carrying, and they're carrying Uzis and wearing Converse.
Yes,
and just an insane practical detail that I'm just like, and I mean, people might get a little, annoyed at like the fact that they're trying to do some like racial humor with the eyeballs, like wearing the hats and doing the accents. Like they're doing everything. These are Rastafarian henchmen, but they're also just giant eyeballs, like with the
Yeah.
Like you could actually see the veins in them and everything like that. And they are
it's also, like, the
quite
way
a
that-
visual gag.
Yeah, and I could see it's a little bit maybe dated in a sense. It doesn't do anything really stereotypical. Luckily, it's mostly just like, and they kind of pitch up the voice a little
maybe
bit to
holding
make
the
it
giant
cartoonish.
joint in the other hand is a little.
Oh, I didn't even notice that actually.
They do. One of them, when they come in later, one of them actually has it in the middle of his eyeball, like he's smoking it out of his pupil.
Oh yeah, you know what? I did notice that, but I thought it was very funny. So I don't know. But yeah, I could totally get it. It's a little. It's one
of those things where someone might be offended by it, but again, the pure practical effect commitment to it, you have to respect it on some level, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And like, again, they don't do like, I guess there are a couple visual things, but like there's no super offensive dialogue or anything like that. Most of the time they just say something like, hey, stop right there, but they have the high-pitched, kind of pitched up Rastafarian accent, and then it's just watching two eyeballs chase,
and also
Keanu
doing
Reeves'
the Mons, you know, you know, doing that kind of stuff. They do get a really fucking great one because they're the ones who eventually kill Sockhead, because Sockhead is like freaking out, being like, we're digging our own graves. He's like yelling and waving his noodle arms in the air, and he just gets slow-mo squib blown away
like
by the Rasta eyes.
Like it's
like
in a John Woo movie or something.
Just squibs popping off everywhere. And I think one of their one-liners, like straight out of like an action movie one-liner, is "that sock full of holes." You know, man.
Oh,
which is just,
I loved them. Every time they popped up, I put a smile on my face. I was losing my mind.
Yeah, but that's how he knows that this is dangerous, and also the fact that he also knows that they're all in danger because Elijah Scruggs saw that bloody massacre and it's like, wow, this is a better show than I've ever put on. I should put this show on every night. So he goes, the hideous killing machine Beast Boy is a hit, so I'm gonna put you up on stage tomorrow night. You're gonna kill all your fellow freaks and be reborn from the ashes like a star. And I think that's when he gets the line where he's like, I've been in show business all my life. The public does not want to see disgusting, depraved, violent filth like this. But yeah, he eventually gets out, and when he gets out, he's like, oh my god, they're all literally trying to pull the exact same plan that I did, and they're all in milkman outfits. They're all going to walk across the exact same portion of the property and get caught by the Rasta eyes. And in order to stop them and save them, he gets into a West Side Story switchblade fight with the dog boy. And that Scruggs line that he gets, and Randy Quaid, he has two lines in this that actually made me keel over. And one of them is this one, which is, wow, that's a lot of milkmen on one route. No wonder they fight, which is just, and, the other one is, the styrofoam cup one, which is just, that's such a ridiculous conceived gag in its entirety that it blows me away, because it's kicked in when Ricky evades that fight with Dog Boy because he gets distracted by a squirrel and literally spends the rest of the movie chasing a squirrel. And the Rasta eyes are distracted chasing the squirrel. So they kind of make Ricky the sort of de facto leader of the group in this like very funny scene where he actually doesn't come up with the plan. Like members of the group all together. It's like this rousing, they're all like town hall meeting where they like, we could make an ointment that turns you into like a super freak, but like a good one. And the Warb could dig a tunnel on his way there. He's like, it's just so crazy it might work. How did you come up with this brilliant genius plan? And this is also the scene where the entire time the fart guy is just farting in the background. Right. They do like a brief training montage to like Butthole Surfer glam metal where it's like, freaks, they're gonna get the job done, they're gonna pull off this plan. And there's that incredible shot where they dig underneath the toad too. It's like a 2D platformer style where the worm is actually digging all the way there. But the gag that kills this entire sequence for me is They break in, they're trying to be incredibly quiet, and they turn on the machine, and it's insanely loud. And they're like, oh my God, we're being so loud. And, Elijah is in his, living room watching TV. He doesn't overhear the crazy machine turning on. It's like this, he's like, how does he not hear that? It's so fucking loud. And they actually find the master volume button too. They just turn it down, which is a gag in and of itself, that it's like the machine doesn't make sound. They just had the volume turned up. Whoops. But the way that gag ends with Ricky accidentally being like, we got to be quiet from now on, and he knocks over a styrofoam cup off of Elijah's table. It falls to the ground in slow motion. It hits, and it goes just a little tiny, little thud. And immediately, huge crash zoom on Elijah's face sitting in his living room, turning back because he heard that, and he goes, styrofoam cup? And then that's what alerts him to their presence there, and he has to run in and go and chase them down. And obviously the kicker of the line too, which is that's bad for the environment.
Yeah. Oh man, it's so good. Another gag, one of my favorites from the montage was just the simple gag of showing Pinhead hammering something on a wall, and then it cuts to another angle of her, and she's just hammering her own hand into it, screaming at the top of her lungs. It's that really got me. But yeah, this whole sequence up to the finale is fantastic. Another gag that I really like when they start doing all the infiltration kind of stuff or the heist stuff is when the worm is looking at it's like they act like they hacked into the computer system, and they're just like, my God, it's complex. And then it cuts to a digital almost jumpstart grade 2 game quality menu of just all the freaks in cartoon grid form.
It's literally press the monkey button to turn someone into a monkey.
Just oh my God, it's complex just got me going so hard. So yeah, and again, this is all in one 5-10 minute sequence. It's just gag after gag after gag after gag. It's just wild.
Yeah, you almost can't keep track of it. And one of my favorite examples of what they do too is that they find a way to set up a gag and find the way that the gag will pay off later. And this section has one of my favorite ones. That's a little sort of a spoiler because they have to flee so fast out of the laboratory that they actually forget to bring the super freak ointment that's going to turn them into a monster that could, sort of kaiju style, beat the shit out of all the bad guys. And Ricky forgets to bring it, and they all go, oh, you fucking idiot. Ricky, how did you forget the one thing we did that whole plan for, and the hole we dug caved in on itself? And he's like, but I did grab the macaroons. and literally confetti goes in the air, balloons are freaking out. They all have a party because he got macaroons, and everyone eats macaroons. But there's one side voice gag in this where the worm goes, I don't like macaroons. I don't want to eat. He's like, I'm not into it. And this comes back because it turns out that the macaroons are actually the cure for the mutations that they've all had forced on them. Right. And so when everyone comes back at the very end of the film and they're not in their monstrous form anymore, literally the worm guy comes out and everyone goes, he's still a worm. He didn't get converted back. And he's just like, just a guy, just a guy because he didn't like macaroons, like that. Committed. And it's just so funny how subtly set up that gag is earlier in the film, as well as being its own gag that they all freaked out about loving macaroons so much. So it's just, again, it's so whiplash and so filled with that it's really incredible. But the big finale is where there's been this running gag through the whole film of Elijah is on the phone with this guy who's supplying him with the Zygrot. And it's just a guy who just laughs maniacally. And there's literally a gag where he's actually understanding what he's saying. It's almost like when you're talking to Chewbacca, Han Solo can understand what he's saying. Elijah can understand the laughing man through the laughs. He's like, can you spell that? And he's like, ha, ha. Ha, and he's actually spelling out what he's saying. Yeah. Either way, it all turns out that was William Sadler, the head of EES, and they have been in bed together the entire time, giving him this Zygrot and using him as a sort of experimental indie artist as to test this out so that they could eventually use it outside of Latin America. And this part of it, when it's all revealed to be one giant corporate conspiracy, a gag that killed me. The old geriatric board members who were saran wrapped and clearly like kept in like the back of a cargo ship on their flight over.
Yeah.
They get pulled out with a forklift, and all 4 of them are on a forklift being, ridden by like, laborers.
Yeah.
And the last one on his chair falls off the forklift and like breaks his neck on the back of the loading truck. And it's clearly a dummy, like a real stunt guy didn't do that.
Which makes it funnier too.
Yeah, but like, man, what a sight gag to just throw in there. And again, it's like just what would usually be the establishing shot of like the board members are walking into the room, and they find a way to fit like an incredibly elaborate, violent gag like that in there.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And not to mention like just watching the visuals of this finale in general, it's like you thought you saw the most grotesque makeup that you possibly could, and then they bust out not 1 but 2 like 8-foot tall gremlin creatures that are gonna battle it out.
Yes.
It's unbelievable, and these things are gooey. Like they look so slimy and disgusting, and like they don't have the most movement to them, but the way they still capture them like is quite effective, and they still have them like turn around and look at the camera and stuff like that. It's great. I absolutely love watching just the makeup somehow get even crazier in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, and the way that it's used as like a monstrous expression of what this corporate policy is meant to be, right? Where they have, these, EES shows up and they're talking to Elijah, and he's pitching them on like his vision for it is super mega freak world, where he's like, we're gonna take this like small little venue that I've got, and we're gonna take it global. We're gonna kick Disney's dead ass, And I love that the one corporate guy goes, hey, I liked Bambi. He's like, Bambi sucks. It's like, what about the part where the mother got shot? It's like, yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah, that's my favorite part. Yeah.
That was so good. And it's so funny because Disney owns the rights to this film now because this was a Fox film. So
really?
The reason this
That's
doesn't
so
have
funny.
a physical release is because of Disney. And I would hope that at some point with that reference that Disney would consider doing it.
Yes, please.
But the way that they pitch him on how to use the gene machine instead for their interests, which is not to just make this like crazy monstrous slapstick carnival show, which the movie is in and of itself kind of doing. But they're like, you could use this same machine not for artistic purposes like you do, but we can use them to make employees. What about a secretary with 6 arms to answer all those phones? What about a factory worker? But maintain her form. A factory worker with 12 arms, no mouth to talk back, no genitalia or gastrointestinal system to distract him from his work. And that fucking cutaway to the stunned laborers just like reacting to the fact that they're going to like mutilate them to turn them into better workers. He's like, this is what we all... He's like, this is what we all dream about, isn't it? And I love that Elijah is like, he's even responding to the corporate attitude. He's like, is this like the most imagination you guys have? Where's the fun?
Yeah.
Where's the spark, the unspeakable evil of it all? And he's like, we got you, man. We're going to put this shit into cosmetics, the military. And why stop there? Let's put it in the water supply and create a master race of consumers that we own the copyright on. And then you see Elijah just being like, man, this guy's pitch is good.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we lured him away from Pepsi.
Yeah, the corporate humor is actually amazing in this.
It's great. Like this whole sequence is hilarious. And the fact that it's capped off by William Sadler going like full Third Reich mode. And he's like, those who dare oppose us will stand knee deep in the blood of their children, by the way.
Yeah. Like that line is so incredibly morbid compared to everything else that you've seen in this. Like everything else is kind of, I mean, that is cartoonishly evil, but it just feels more, it feels like it belongs in a different film when he says that specific line. Another great gag that I love is when they have the 2 giant gremlins actually fight, and the people start like betting money and arguing over what a legal and illegal move in this fight is and stuff like that, as if it's like an MMA style fight or something like that. It's that's a great gag too.
Yeah, man. They're the big monstrous kaiju gremlin smackdown that everyone's like, this is the greatest thing that I've ever seen. And it's literally between Ricky and Stewie, because Stewie, during that whole corporate meeting, runs out with the serum. And he's like, Ricky, I got the serum you were looking for. And of course, he's a total klutz, so he trips and falls and smashes it on himself. And the fact that you can actually kind of tell that it's also the Stewie gremlin, because all of his features are just the same features as that Mad Magazine kid. So
Yeah.
it's literally just like, imagine if the Mad Magazine kid was a gremlin.
Yeah, that's really what it is.
That's exactly what it looks like.
And I like that even in the middle of this, they're like, and again, within the fight, there's a ton of gags, but they're like, no, let's throw another gag in there, which is where they pause the entire thing that you're watching so that Brooke Shields can be like, actually, we have to cut to a commercial because you've been talking for like 90 straight minutes.
A commercial for machismo.
Yeah, which I guess would probably be something that would be based out of like the Idiot Box or something like that.
Yes,
it's very much a
very much
cutaway
so.
kind of infomercial or a commercial kind of thing. But I just love, and then they go right back into it. They're like, okay, now back to your story, and then you just go back to Randy Quaid bazookaing the CEO board and turning them into a giant sludge.
Turning them into a society flesh shoe.
Yeah.
Which is great fucking payoff for the everything except shoes corporation people to just be like this giant grotesque looking shoe.
Yeah. And then one of my favorite gags too, and this reminds me of something that would be maybe in like the Stella shorts or something, just kind of a very funny, absurd moment, whereas the cow, who's a full-fledged cow, right? We've talked about that, doing a zoom in, and he's just like, let him into your heart, your heart, your heart,
your heart.
And he just keeps
it just cuts away to
it.
him actually saying it. It's not actually happening in his head.
I love that so much. And they add that little like Western twang to his voice to it. It makes it just slightly funnier. Yeah. This finale.
Oh yeah, Toad guy's head being exploded with dynamite. The Rasta eyes being taken out by just throwing sand at them, like you're having sand thrown in your eyes. Like like the amount of visual insanity and like slapstick humor that is so clearly choreographed and had to have been planned out for the visual effects and the makeup and the practical effects. Like, again, it's all in the name of incredibly stupid, like simple humor that maybe if someone said it out loud to you, you wouldn't think is that funny. But again, this just sheer directorial commitment to it all really does sell it. Like, the idea of giant eyeballs having sand thrown in them is very silly. And man, is it like a committed to gag when they finally do this, and when they finally do take out Elijah by throwing him in the giant pile of goo. And they all find out that the cure was macaroons, was the coconut macaroons that they all ate, which does lead to a great silhouette gag when they go back to the show and you're like, wait, but he's been silhouetted the whole time as like the monster, the way that you do like an anonymous broadcast of someone.
Yeah.
And then they just go, hey, like Brooke Shields, we fixed the lights. And they're like, oh, finally, we're like 90 minutes into the broadcast, and they just turn the lights on. And because he wasn't silhouetted to hide his appearance, he was just normal the whole time.
Yeah. which is awesome. Oh,
so like that's funny. And the fact that Keanu, the dog boy, finally runs onto the show at that point, and he catches the squirrel, and he's been presumably chasing that squirrel the entire time. And when he does catch it, he just throws it into the audience, and the squirrel starts biting a woman's face off in the audience as like a throwaway gag.
The FBI showing up. This is, I guess, before they get to the show again, but the FBI showing up and just open firing on Randy. Unbelievably funny to watch.
Randy Quaid, who, by the way, is disguised as Brooke Shields. And they go, well, yeah, and you go, do you know what, Brooke? Like, it was you. He looked just like you, except he had monstrous feet. The tilt down to Brooke Shields having monster feet. Yeah.
And then they just open fire like 2 or 3 times into her. I think it's the two co-stars, the Megan Ward. Yeah, Megan Ward, and then the guy who plays Ernie both take turns getting to shoot her down like she's a slasher villain who keeps coming back to life. And that's also the freeze frame of the movie, as she comes back like Jason style, to try and kill them all. That's great. And it's just insane to watch Brooke Shields get lit up like that.
Yeah. Not how you like, again, we've described so much stuff that happens in this, and I'm sure we've even still like missed some stuff that happens
Definitely.
in it, and we've been talking for it. I think we're probably going to end up going longer than the actual movie is. So like it is crazy how fast and intense this whole thing is. So
yeah, and
can't overstate that. Even by the finale, it's still finding a way to throw a gag in every shot, in every like single second that it can manage one. And
like the pervert character learning about feminism and then having a woman just punch him in the face. That's fun too. That's just great.
Yep.
And that's how it ends. I do like.
Yeah,
I do think it's funny
they all go. We've learned a lesson that infringing on the subtle perfection of Earth's natural order is only going to create havoc, which is obviously a very hilarious lesson to be learned because this is the most like havoc based movie I've maybe ever seen.
Oh yeah,
havoc is like its attitude.
And I like the it's almost a gag in itself. I don't know if it was due to things that were cut or if it's just like a little bit of we don't care about this love interest very much, but it's just part of these comedies, so we'll throw it in there. But I actually found it funny when they end up kissing because it's so underdeveloped that it was just like another gag almost to wrap up the typical
That's
comedy
true.
that
You're like,
watching.
wait, did they end up even ever liking each other at some point?
Yeah,
but no, it's very possible that it was cut. Yeah.
That's the thing. I don't think there's any scene like it could honestly have been a funny scene because he would have had to deal with the fact that Ernie is beside her the entire time because they're newly conjoined twins. But yeah, I don't think there is one scene besides the beginning when he's trying to like trick her that he's not Rick, and then that's it. And so for them to wrap it up with like, oh yeah, they kiss and
he gets the girl. Yeah.
I actually thought it was a funny gag, even if it was on purpose or not.
Yeah. And who knows? Yeah, maybe it was just meant to be. That's what the cliche is, and the joke is that they didn't set it up for a set. In fact, every scene that they had between them probably would you would assume that it would not be the path that the movie is going to take because it doesn't make any sense.
She pretty much hates him, and then like the only other time you get interaction with him is when she vomits from the sight of him, and maybe a couple other moments, but they're never romantic. So it was kind of funny.
Yeah, but this is a very honestly solid to high 4 for me if we're pivoting towards reductive rating round. Again, I think that Stern and Winter and Burns, all three of them, do a really incredible job of cashing in on the popularity of Bill and Ted, and and giving people some of that like stoner rocker comic absurdity that people who like that like you got William Sadler as a crazy corporate goon making silly faces. You've got Keanu doing a really committed performance as the dog boy. So like I could imagine people who like Bill and Ted would enjoy this, and but apparently that was what they were saying. Test audiences kind of rejected it, and that was why the studio got cold feet because they thought they were like greenlighting a Bill and Ted spinoff or something, and that I guess wasn't the impression a lot of audiences at the time got from it. Which, to be fair, is maybe because of how Winter has managed to take that sensibility and merge it just entirely with his own weirdo one and do it in like it's much more vulgar. It's arguably maybe even more stupid. It has like a sketch comedy sense of sort of like schizophrenic mindset
pacing.
About how it approaches humor and pacing, and obviously they are doing this sort of experimental punk noise rock MTV thing to it as well, where they were trying to be like, how do we get the demented outsider youths of the 1990s to watch a mainstream comedy movie, like the people who are into the Butthole Surfers and Ren and Stimpy and that kind of stuff. And in my opinion, they couldn't. I don't think you could do. Like, that's such an ambitious thing to try to pull off, and I think they did it about as best as you could do in terms of really spending all of that studio money, like really truly getting outsiders who have weird comic sensibilities to make this. The visual style is incredibly anarchic and wild, and totally like Burns, when he was there talking about what they were taking inspiration from in the writing, and he was going off about like, we were reading nonstop Mad Magazine, we were mainlining Monty Python, we were going back to the Zucker brothers with things like Naked Gun and Airplane, and like you can tell all of that is in here. And also just somehow a bunch of friends got to $12 million to just like make the weirdest thing they could possibly make. And we've already laid out a lot of the weird details, but like, man, the monster and creature effects, the fucking oozy eyeball henchman, the absurd sort of like slapstick humor of violence against the kid. This is just like, I really don't understand the original Fox exec who thought this would do anything other than just like freak 90s parents out and be like, my kids can't fucking watch this. This is going to make them like, remember 90s parents thought like the Simpsons were going to make their kids rebellious like Bart Simpson.
Yeah.
What would 90s parents have thought this would do to their fucking kids? Like, it's just,
Yeah.
you know, like they were like, no, this is gonna fucking turn them into monsters, and they are, you know. And so to do all of that and fit in Sam Raimi and Peter Jackson visual sensibility, body horror and science fiction elements, and also do a total throwback to the Todd Browning Freaks movie, which is an incredible Freaks in and of itself in terms of its concept and its premise and its heart about feeling for these guys and wanting them to overcome their corporate overlords and all of that. Like, it's it is a pretty incredible movie with lots of blink and you miss it gags, genuinely, and incredible staging and everything. So check it out if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, the gags per minute, hell, the gags per every 10 seconds is pretty incredible in this. And the makeup effects are clearly where most of the budget went, and I think it was a good decision to do that. It really shows the performances once they're in the makeup. I mean, even before the makeup, they're completely exaggerated and cartoonish, but they really commit to once they get inside those suits and just have to go absolutely insane. I loved watching Keanu as the dog boy. It's such a weird such a weird performance, and it's awesome that he was committed enough to do it. Because of the contractual stuff that he was going through, I imagine he did it because him and Alex Winter are such good friends, or at least were at the time. It seems like they still are. But you can tell that they're having an absolute blast every single scene that they're in together, and I love seeing that, especially because Keanu, I think at this time, would have been quite big. So for him to do something like this is just awesome. I love his heart. I think Alex Winter and Tom Stern have such a good vision for like grotesque, crude, punky humor. It stays true to that form the entire runtime. The pacing is just nonstop. It's in your face. It's very aggressive in that way. It's very much like a punk rock song, and I think that's awesome. I don't have too much else to add, honestly. I think this is just I would highly recommend it. It's a very easy watch. Once again, it's like 75 minutes if you were including credits, and if you just want to kind of shut off and laugh, this is definitely the one for you, I think. As long as you can handle the kind of the crude humor, if that's your style, then you're gonna love this. If it is maybe too much for you, this might actually be overbearing or overwhelming.
Yeah, I could see someone just absolutely hating this thing.
It's
not me, but I could see it.
It is silly. Like, it is ridiculous. It's absurd. It's not trying to be in any way serious. Even its commentary, although it is saying things about the corporations and ownership and kind of individuality and stuff. Like, it's not trying too hard to make those points. It's really just trying to entertain you. And it does it through and through, at least for me. So yeah, it's a solid 4, maybe even a strong 4 out of 5. I think it's a lot of fun.
Hell yeah. Well, that'll wrap it up, I think, for Freaked. We're going to be right back talking about, again, the movie that like hardly anybody has seen, Frauds. Stick around.
Oh dear. Who's ready to go to jail?
What do you want?
He's going to break every rule.
That man gives me the creeps.
He's going to use every trick in the book
Mrs. Waits!
to uncover their secret.
Detective. He sent the police over this afternoon. He set us up.
For Jonathan and Beth, a little dishonesty is about to go.
He's not going to stop.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Frauds, the 1993 Australian absurdist comedy crime thriller film written and directed by Stephen Elliott and starring singer-songwriter drummer extraordinaire Mr. Phil Collins, alongside Hugo Weaving of Matrix and Lord of the Rings fame for a lot of people, and Josephine Burns. This is our first time talking about Stephen Elliott, who is an Australian filmmaker best known for his drag queen road movie called The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which you know is something actually of a cult film that people might know. Maybe not even a cult film. It got nominated for an Oscar for Best Costume Design. It was a pretty big film even when it came out. Also starring Hugo Weaving, although alongside Guy Pearce in that film. And I've never seen it, but it actually sounds quite interesting, and if the visual sensibility of this film is any indication, then I'm definitely curious, because he actually made this, I think, before it, and it was released after because Priscilla got enough like acclaim and attention that they kind of were like, see the sophomore feature, even though it was technically made first.
They're like, we're not letting Frauds be your first.
Yeah, but Stephen Elliott, apparently, he's a playwright, he's a music video director based out of Australia, which is apparently how he got interested in working with Phil Collins, because he met him, he saw him in an episode of Miami Vice from the second season, which any Miami Vice heads will know as Phil the Shill, where he played this coked up British TV personality doing deals in Miami. It's a very funny episode. He had an excellent hairline for that character. Many maybe aren't familiar, but Collins was actually interested in acting as long as he was in music, if not before he was in music, and was actually auditioning and doing extra work even as early as the Beatles film The Hard Day's Night, which was before he even signed with Genesis. That's wild. And obviously his Miami Vice role definitely came after the fact that he established the Booty soundscape for that show with the pilot's very iconic use of In the Air Tonight.
So good.
But I guess for whatever reason, Stephen Elliott saw him as a good fit for this Roland Coppings character, who is this wacky, sociopathic sort of insurance investigator who uses very outrageous, childish games and gimmicks as part of his job, and eventually blackmails this married couple Weaving and Burns about the accidental killing of their friend during a quote-unquote prank gone wrong, which we'll talk about, which to him comes off as a very unusual claim. The tagline for this film is he's no ordinary insurance man, and you can bet your life on it. So that's the kind of sort of like pun-based tone we're going to be taking, and also it's in terms of, I will say, the visual sensibility. I already said it at the top of the show, but man, this movie is colorful. It is absurd. People at the time compared it to Beetlejuice, which makes sense just in the sense that it's like Phil Collins at a certain point does start to come off as a supernatural presence who is terrorizing, a domestic couple, which is very similar in terms of set piece structure as Beetlejuice. But also, Phil Collins is going full like Pee-wee man-child, except for if Pee-wee was like evil. He wasn't like adorable and making everyone's lives a little bit better and making friends everywhere he went. What if he was just playing like the cruelest, meanest pranks kind of all time on people, essentially? And
we're talking things like he jumps from, just putting glue on your hand and getting a piece of paper stuck to your hand to almost attempted murder with a vehicle. Like he really jumps. Yes,
it's ridiculous.
He jumps back and forth with these pranks. He really has no threshold at all. He just, it seems misery is his entertainment, whether that be through something small or something large. And I love the way that Phil Collins acts or performs this. It's incredibly over the top and cartoonish, and it matches the rest of the film. It's such a
playful smirk to him.
Yeah, it matches the rest of the film because, like you said, this thing is it's colorful, it's bombastic, it's very, very hyperbolized, like just with even the way that Hugo Weaving and Josephine Burns perform. Josephine has a little bit more of a grounded, laid back performance, and Hugo starts there. But then, as Phil Collins and Hugo start to go more head to head, Hugo starts to become as cartoonish in his performance as Phil Collins, and that's very interesting to watch and progress.
Yeah, well, because part of it, and we'll get to it when we kind of talk about the structure of this, but like we kind of realized by the end of the virtual screening, and especially on the ending of the film, which I think the ending is quite great, actually, that this whole movie is structurally like a couple who can't take a joke, and through a series of bizarre home invasions and being terrorized by Phil Collins, they learn to laugh. and
through the accidental killing of their friend and everything like that too.
Yeah, well, because that's what we'll talk about, because this is technically, I guess you would call it like a crime gone wrong farce. Like you might even compare it in terms of premise to like, you know, the kind of heist that like a Coen Brothers character would try to pull off.
And then just fail miserably. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but it's funneled through this very diabolical and strange and like energetic toy factory kind of like funhouse aesthetic. Like it has a sort of twinkling Danny Elfman knockoff score to it. It has very animated visuals and big dynamic camera moves, which we'll talk about some very wacky set design, including a villain lair, which we'll get into, that is just like incredibly man-child in design. Even the set decoration of more normal characters, like we were talking about it in the first 20 minutes when they sit on a certain couch that Hugo Weaving and Josephine Burns own, and we're like, that is one insanely wacky looking couch, and that's just the normal people. That's before you get to Phil Collins' incredible lair. So just in general, it seems it has a very like almost Dr. Seuss-esque look to it a lot of the time. Yeah. And what's interesting is that I guess, like, I think Hugo and Josephine are supposed to sort of be the leads, but it does kind of start more with focusing on Collins, who is made into like this presence, because the opening scene is this like flashback of this precocious bow-tied child getting no ordinary dice for his birthday, but an heirloom from his father, and his mother is like none of his friends, he clearly doesn't have any friends. No one showed up to his birthday party, and to make him feel better, she's just like, look, this dice controls your life now, which don't say that to a child. It just seems like a bad idea, in my opinion. But she's like, if I roll 1, 2, 3, you can't sulk anymore that nobody showed up. If I roll 4, 5, 6, you have to make the best of your party, like no matter what. Like even if it's horrible, you need to try and find the fun and humor in it. And he takes that philosophy completely to heart, using the dice to convince his brother Matthew to get on a raft into the river that soon goes out of control. And his brother has to grab onto like the steel debris hanging over the river. There's this huge overhead like crane shot of the raft going over the edge. I don't know how much this cost, but like it actually doesn't seem like it was a cheap movie.
Right. It does not look cheap at all.
No, and especially in terms of the sets they would have had to build for this. And the mom is like screaming, trying to get his brother Matthew, who is dangling, and the kid just falls in the river. You assume that the kid died, and Roland is just kind of like laughing about it. It's just it's a very dark and comically ridiculous way that clearly like left an impression on the young boy, who, when he grows up as Phil Collins, doing his very over the top British sadism performance that he's doing, where he's just like this eccentric insurance claims investigator who still behaves like a child because he believes that it is the most honest, unique period of life, and who has, I guess, gotten very good at finding out who's defrauding insurance companies by being hyper aware of manipulation tactics, because his entire hobby is doing that, is building these Rube Goldberg level elaborate pranks, which like some classic ones, like just lighting a bag of dog shit on fire. Yeah, which we see him do in like a little tracking shot of just his hand scooping up poop and putting it on the stoop and ringing the doorbell while he maniacally laughs. But also doing weirder ones that Jamie was alluding to, like dropping a suspended cage full of rabbits on a guy just walking his dog, which I actually don't know if I've seen that one before. I don't know if that's a classic prank. Calling a telephone booth from his balcony to attract a woman to it, so when she grabs the handle, she just super glues her hand to it and then has to listen to his terrible jokes over the phone. And then the next one, which is wild because it's really like you go from the glue on the hand prank, which I would consider maybe more of a classic, grade school prank. And then he has a remote control
a full-sized vehicle that he's using to pretty much try to run over a couple that's on the road.
Yeah, he operates it like an RC car with a dummy in it, and he's literally just trying to like hit and run people.
Yeah, and he's just up on his balcony laughing his ass off. And I do like part of the joke too is as the pranks get more just honestly deadly and pretty much attempted murder, the film doesn't tonally change, so it's still just as wacky and silly as he's doing these just outrageously dangerous things. And I like that really got a lot of laughter out of me.
Yeah, and he does all of these pranks from the comfort of his own, sort of like home / lair of what is an overgrown man-child. And as I said, it's like basically the more evil version of Pee-wee's house and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, where he even has like a pet goose and he has like these like weird Rube Goldberg setups for his morning routine. He's just laughing at all of his shit. But he really enters the movie proper, basically as like this force of almost like predestined punishment for the ostensible kind of like everyday normal domestic Wheats family, who we find out are very much not that. You have the like ambitious ladder climbing, basically. Yeah, but you have the ambitious ladder climbing, like business focused Jonathan, played by Hugo Weaving. Very young and handsome Hugo Weaving, though still with those unique facial features that really emphasize how like slimy and wide eyed he can be at times.
Yeah. And with this one, he's more of a like they use it for more of a lovable nerd kind of thing, a little bit.
His little like toy soldiers and like his very 90s dad kind of outfits and Josephine Burns is playing Beth, his very assertive and artistic wife, who I've never seen in anything else actually, but I kind of liked her in this. And
I did too.
I made me kind of curious about her.
And this character makes the creepiest fucking paintings I've ever seen. Like there's one, we were making commentary about it. There's just like scenes where her paintings are in the background and we're like, that is the most ominous looking painting to put up above the dining room table. It's they almost look like it's like children but with giant dark eyes. It's very strange style, but it's unique.
Yeah, they like to play adult Twister in front of it for some reason, which I couldn't quite figure out, because we're introduced to them hosting like a wine drunk party and playing a casual game of adult Twister, to which one of them says this game would be better naked and with baby oil. Also making plans to go and see musicals with their friends, and but on the night that they plan to go to a musical, Beth actually goes home early from the show, forgetting that she was supposed to go straight there after work, and she finds herself in the middle of a very ominous thunderstorm, and she hears something in the house, and she's doing these walks through these like canted angle highways and descending the steps and these like overhead shots that emphasize how alone she is, and you're not quite sure why until she finds out someone has invaded her home in this like hugely exaggerated dolly zoom shot on her shocked expression, which is like incredible. And she gets into an altercation with the guy who's stealing shit and trying to kill her with this huge slasher knife. And as all Australians would, she brutally kills him with the family hunting crossbow, impaling him through his torso, getting blood all over the rope and walls, and revealing it to be their family friend who was just over the other night getting drunk and playing Twister. And he goes, geez, Beth, can't you take a joke? And we all just, even at the virtual watch, we were like, sick prank, bro. Yeah. Like, here's the good joke, man.
Here's the thing. It's like, I don't ever do this kind of prank ever. It's really just a recipe for disaster, obviously. But at the very least, when you first scare her, and you turn around and you've got the mask on, that's when you take it off and you're like, it's a prank, my bad.
You don't need to grab the Michael Myers knife and start chasing her around.
It's like, you're asking for it, man. It's fucking wild. And then what is crazy, because we've been already talking about the tone, which is very silly, very ridiculous, very cartoonish. And it's not like super violent. There's heavy implications of it, but it's not incredibly violent. And then you get this scene where she literally shoots the crossbow through his body, and then there's a string attached to it, and it actually shows him kind of moving through the impaled hole with the string for a little while before he
covered
falls
in
over.
blood.
It's crazy. I was like, and honestly, if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anything else in this movie matches that kind of like really that violence. There might be implications, but just showing somebody like going back and forth on their open wound on the string, I was shocked by it compared to everything else. But it works. It's effective. It's very effective.
Yeah, no, it's so bizarre. It's weirdly gross. The whole this tone kind of affects the whole movie, and I think for some people that could end up being a little bit like hit or miss, because it is inconsistent. I will say for sure. It is. Like it's definitely
shockingly inconsistent. Yeah.
And even the pacing, it's a little wonky in the pacing, and the dramatic characterizations they try to go for, like they're a bit thin in terms of like, the relationship between the couple.
They try to make her feel kind of guilty for what happened in a sense, and I understand like she'd be going through that that turmoil in a way, but they don't. There's a weird focus on it because they're still trying to get the wackiness from like Phil Collins' character and that whole debacle, but then they're also trying to go back to her, and she'll be triggered by seeing the crossbow or seeing something that reminds her
being like legitimately traumatized and stuff like that,
and I don't think that
stuff doesn't really register.
Yeah,
no, even though they tried to, because they did try to make that scene incredibly violent,
right.
But it's just because the way that Hugo and Josephine play their roles, they almost play them as ridiculously sometimes as the Phil Collins character.
Yes.
So it's not like it isn't quite on like that Beetlejuice level of like, Michael Keaton is genuinely far more absurd than anyone else around him who's taking the situation more seriously. The whole movie kind of has like that tone is correct. But like everything about it has that tone. It's almost like the entire movie's made by Beetlejuice, think of it kind of that way.
Yeah.
But even the judge who sentences her is like, yeah, that wasn't murder.
He's like, that guy was an idiot, prank, bro.
Yeah. And the way that they get under Phil Collins's radar is that they try to claim the number of damages that the house sustained during that altercation, and also that there was a second unseen accomplice who got away with items, who we later find out actually just was Hugo Weaving, who was trying to fraud his own insurance company, like almost noir style, pull a heist on his house, and do a little light perjury and manslaughter, and bam, a new car. That's was ultimately kind of his idea. And Collins arrives at the house to either approve or disprove the claim that they've made, and it is obviously a pretty openly ridiculous crime, so you understand why it kind of warrants investigation, but the movie really does just get weirder from there. Like Collins really playing up his animated man-child mannerisms inside these like increasingly preposterous situations and production design. I love when Beth is like, he was here to assess the damage to the table, not play Yahtzee on it, or she's like, at least we know what happened to Rosemary's Baby, like based on the vibes that he's giving off because he's so evil. And as Jamie was saying, even just the Wheats are weird, and their house is weird. The experimental pastel colors of their house, the creepy paintings, and the battle between them and Collins, who is like sadistically pressuring them for, more information about their absurd story and trying to get to the bottom of all of this. And Beth is just trying to move on, kind of becomes the dramatic structure of the film, until he actually does find out that that Jonathan actually did it, and then it turns into this whole thing where, because he finds out by he was trying to keep the antique silverware they claimed was stolen, just like basically like in a safe, and one of the forks was in a hiding spot in the garage in his like miniature toy soldier display. And Phil Collins actually does have a plan where he like shows him a fork and is like, it's a forgery, but he's like, I found your fork. And what it does is it makes Hugo Weaving go and check his hiding spot, which Phil Collins observes, and he's just like, hey, he's like, man, you shouldn't have checked your hiding spot, man. I know where your shit is. And even the guilt is getting to Hugo Weaving, because there's the cartoonish ways the movie plays up the panic and the stress of Hugo Weaving trying to get away with this crime. The biggest one is that crazy, surreal nightmare sequence, which is incredibly funny and grotesque, with Hugo Weaving eating an entire rotisserie chicken in his wife's painting room while she's painting, and then nearly choking to death in the background of the scene on the fork that he feels guilty for still having hidden, because it's literally inside of him and coming out of him. But it's done in these crazy animated camera movements where the camera will just like be zoomed in on his face. Then it will just like yank back and pull out to the ceiling to show you the fact that the wife is not paying attention to him dying in the corner.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it has that, I think you compared it to Nightmare on Elm Street, where he also, like, to end it, they have, I think it might be a Phil Collins figure that kind of comes out of the red painting.
I was trying to figure out if it was that or if it was the friend who's meant to be coming out of it with the crossbow.
I think you're right, because I think it's her.
You can't really tell because he looks like a fucking Lucio Fulci monster.
Yeah, because he comes out of. She's been painting the portrait red for the base the whole time, so that by the time he pops out, it does kind of just look like he's covered in blood or something like that. It's really quite amazing. I also really like that it's established this strange kind of surreal tone already. So at first, when you're watching this scene, even though it is weird because you have Hugo Weaving in the like just surrounded by all these paintings, eating a full-on rotisserie chicken, I was just buying it. You know, I was kind of like, well, we've already seen some wacky shit from Phil Collins, kind of the set design here, so I don't think that we're in anything different than we've already been in. And then it just kind of escalates and just keeps going and going, more absurd until she finally wakes up, or he wakes up.
Yeah, which, by the way, is in a crazy shot where it starts in his mouth as he's screaming, like we're looking at his tonsils.
Right.
Then it pulls out so that you get a double shot of both of them screaming upright, completely in bed, and then it goes over and zooms into her mouth and comes out the other side. So again, there's a crazy kind of just animated fluidity to the way that this has been visually constructed, and I would say that was probably the thing I was the most impressed about, because I do think that in terms of writing, it's very funny and it's weird and it's something that I enjoyed, but it's very inconsistent and doesn't totally nail everything it's trying to do. But on a directing level, he almost directs it so well that it kind of works.
Yes.
Like even the stuff that maybe shouldn't work about it kind of works, and I was impressed by that especially.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because I did feel detached a lot of the time from anything that the characters were personally going through, but I was just absolutely fascinated and enthralled any single time like one of their performances matched up with the styling of the directing and everything like that, which is honestly consistent throughout the whole thing. And so I think that is where its real strength lies. It comes up short a little bit when you're trying to actually care about her overcoming the trauma and things like that. It's just too cartoonish with the rest of the film. I do, in a sense, I could see him balancing it out a little bit more, just having that scene where she kills the friend. It seems like you could use maybe one or two more of those scenes, but at the same time, my brain tells me how much I love all this cartoonish nonsense. So it's hard for me to really know exactly what I want from this movie, to be honest. It's such a weird anomaly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that it just ends up kind of doing is that it might have been better served by either trying to lean it into a little bit darker and actually trying to go like full Beetlejuice horror movie mode with it, or because it does feel weird that sometimes you get like some flatter scenes where just straight up dialogue scenes where Phil Collins his performance is kind of left stranded to just kind of be weird and be like he's just stunt casting, and you know, but because I don't think he's bad, but I do think that it is like one of those things where if you're going to do a performance like that, you need to have a little bit more tight control over the characters, and this one seems pretty lax and pretty messy in terms of just like letting it go wherever he thought he could find a gag, which is something that again makes more sense from sketch comedians and with really random wacky pacing, like,
and in the context of
has.
Freaked, because it's like the premise itself just allows you to kind of be all over the place, a little bit more chaotic, whereas this, they're trying to really set up certain character motivations and changing
this does have a more obviously grounded narrative and script to it, right? And so you know those two things are kind of fighting each other a little bit, but I will say that the actual sequencing itself, like when he does functionally just become a bit of like the Beetlejuice figure where he's just like pulling tricks on them, like calling the cops to meet Beth at home and trigger her by having the crossbow weapon she killed her friend with, like come back to her house, and they go, "It's so unfortunate, Beth, we're not going to be able to find your antique cutlery, ma'am." You know, like it was a really beautiful, irreplaceable set. We're so sorry. As she notices that Phil Collins has displayed a big Christmas tree with all of the cutlery laid in it as if it was like ornaments, and hanging below a giant Steal Me star on top, and just the level of stress on her face and the insane visual construction of it where there's like split diopter shots of the cops like looking at her and not right behind them at the evidence of her fraud, and it climaxing on that like vomit gag where she just projectile vomits all over them and then throws the tree out the window, which then cuts to the exterior where Collins is like maniacally laughing at all of the chaos that he's caused in like this wide angle lens shot of him just chomping on a disgusting cheeseburger. Like, it's just like when you get into that level of mania is when the movie excels.
Yeah. And he seems like the way that his character moves just physically seems completely disconnected from reality. It's almost as if he can teleport, or he's like a ghost or truly a demon or something like that can just kind of go in and out of the realm that he's messing with.
He's a demon that loves playing Monopoly and treating your life like it's Monopoly. Essentially. There's even a great transition where he throws the dice into the air at one point, rolling for them, and then it does like a very smooth sort of like fade into another shot where the dice are landing, and it's landing on the board game that he's playing with them, and they're like what do you want from us? Like, what are you doing with this? Because when he says that he found out that they did it, or that Hugo Weaving did it, he says, "I am approving your claim." And that's because he's going to blackmail them, man. He wants his cut of that fraud money. He wants to gleefully control and torture them. And as you would expect, do big musical numbers. Although they are all lip syncing.
Yeah, I did say at the beginning,
I got you under my skin.
I did say at the beginning before we watched this that I was like, I just want one, like if this is going to be a truly wacky comedy and Phil Collins is going to be the star, I want one musical number. And we did get it. So I was very happy about that. I was a little disappointed that it was lip syncing, but it was also, it kind of adds to a little bit of the wackiness as well, having Phil Collins lip sync. And I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong,
it's
but
delightful,
it's
delicious, delovely, as he's like driving his little freaking like toy car around and shit.
Yeah. So I was very happy about that. And briefly speaking about the split diopter sequence, I love too that it's like 3 or 4 split diopter shots in a row that get closer and closer. Like the cop's face gets more close up as the tree does as well, and it really induces that kind of anxiety feeling. But then at the same time, because it's so close up and cartoonish, it still gives the kind of wacky quality that it's been doing the whole time. But these prank sequences after everything has been revealed to Collins's character is just so much fun and awesome.
Yeah, they are like he really is just having a blast, and Phil Collins is clearly having a blast. Because I will say I was surprised when we put it on, or even when I looked it up, that he wasn't doing the soundtrack on it. Because I was like, man, I would have assumed that Phil Collins, he's a pretty big musician at this point in his career, especially. Like, how is he not like being like, no, I'm doing the score. I get to do double duty. I'm in control here.
Yeah,
but
he wanted to focus. He wanted to be one with this character.
That's right. He was totally down to just lend his weirdo vibes to this maniacal character and just do crazy shit on screen for Mr. Stephen Elliott.
And like I think you mentioned it already, but having that kind of Danny Elfman-esque score that they do is really effective for the cartoonish qualities, because it is doing that thing where it's like,
for sure,
if a character walks off in a certain way because they're maybe reacting and they have like a certain emotion about their walk, there will be music that kind of directly goes with their footsteps, that kind of thing. It's very much like Looney Tunes-esque, that kind of thing. It's directly kind of telling you beat for beat how to take in the scene and the music itself and the performances. And I do really like that. It is very much like just trying to be Danny Elfman, I think, a lot of the time. But But that style at least really does line up well with what they're doing.
Yeah. No, it's pretty. This is a pretty well directed and well scored film, even if it is just like it owes clearly so much to the popularity of
Burton and
Tim
Elfman.
Burton. But the thing is if you're gonna try and copy Tim Burton, this is the best stuff to try to copy.
Hell yeah.
No one's trying to copy. If you want to go back to him, go back to Pee-wee. Go back to Beetlejuice. Go back to
Edward Scissorhands.
Even Batman Returns.
Yeah.
Edward Scissorhands. There was a time where that guy was a genuinely unparalleled image maker, and Danny Elfman was allowed to just go off like fucking crazy. So,
yes, and did he ever?
Yeah, and but eventually Collins makes Jonathan a deal. That if he rolls 1, 2, and 3, once again going back to this dice thing and this games thing, because he is he's a precocious child at heart. He does still totally adhere to the idea of games and rules, although he is clearly willing to break the rules when he wants to do stuff for fun himself. But he's like, if I roll a 1, 2, or 3, I leave your life forever. 4, 5, and 6, Hugo has to be his slave for 60 minutes. It's obviously such an ominous proposition based on what we've seen him intricately stage for non-consenting participants in his pranks. So
I was like 60 minutes with somebody, a little more boring. It'd be like, okay, he's going to do his laundry, his dishes, clean his
60
house,
minutes
whatever.
with Jigsaw.
Yeah,
yes or no?
This is 60 minutes with Jigsaw, the devil, Freddy Krueger. Like, this motherfucker is going to make you do some things in that hour. So I was like, Hugo, don't do it, bud. Come on.
Yeah, he's like a Bond villain. He's doing a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But it does result in this finale where the Wheats decide to finally do play his game, especially when Beth realizes that in some ways Jonathan is quite similarly a man-child as he is with his toy soldiers and with his insurance scams that he treats like a game that you either win or lose. So they finally decide they're going to take this game to Roland's home and his joke workshop lair, which is this insane feat of production design. Again, somewhere between 80s Tim Burton, but also things like Willy Wonka. While we were watching, Jamie was like, dude, Dr. Seuss. Totally. I thought it kind of looked like the Toy Factory finale in Child's Play 2 a little bit, because it's this giant multi-layered set with a bedroom attic where he has a hexagonal floor, gold bed sheets, a bedroom with a pet goose in it who at one point participates in the musical number and chases and attacks Hugo around the set. A main floor with level with creepy dolls and toys and stuffed animals, pastel colored walls, giant gadgets and mouse traps and just clown shit, bouncy ball pits, electrocuting metal slides. He has a giant birthday play date room filled with candy and chocolate and balloons, and then a very bottom floor where he has a giant pool party room that he gets to via the giant big slide, which kind of becomes important when Hugo finds out that Collins's brother Matthew from the opening didn't actually die, but is actually a vegetative quadriplegic, which we will get into when we talk about the incredibly weird finale.
Oh man, is it ever weird? Just the image itself when it's all set up. I won't spoil it yet, but oh my absolute god. Yeah, the Funhouse design is so awesome. It's honestly incredibly intricate, very colorful. What I like too is that they slowly unveil everything. You have Hugo discovering it, and you have the middle ground that he's looking at, and then he goes to his upper bedroom and everything. But then eventually, once Phil Collins is involved and they're kind of battling each other in that space, they start to go to even below the contraptions of where the middle floor is. And I just found that the camera eventually gets pretty much every angle of that set by the time the finale's over. And so they took full advantage of whatever they built there, because that thing is just, it's so crazy. It really makes no logical sense, which, makes sense to Phil Collins' character, but it really is, when you're looking at this thing, just a bunch of nonsense contraptions. And it's such a blast.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And it is like the design of it is basically the basis for the finale, because it's like, how can we get the camera to crane and move through this very intricately designed set and have all of these actors finally all in the same room as one another in a space that occupies the same level of animated, gleeful weirdness that their performances have. And, you know, I would say that it mostly, it leaves a little something to be desired in some of the staging. Like a lot of it is Phil Collins, like just like holding a gun at Hugo and them getting into who's come up with the bigger Rube Goldberg machine.
One of my favorite moments is when they like have the kind of square off moment, and they do the dice roll, which has been, you know, true to Phil Collins' character the entire time. And it's like the one time he doesn't get it and he's just like, fuck it, and just starts fighting him instead. It's like it didn't matter the entire time. He's just really been looking for the mischief in the fight.
Yeah, well, because he kidnaps Beth and he ties her up and puts her in a goofy cart on his slide where there's a saw blade waiting at the bottom to slice her in half when he pulls a giant, like, fancy curtain rope with one hand. And, you know, Phil Collins is just on a gold telephone chomping on a giant watermelon while he's doing his evil monologue about it. And Hugo Weaving counters it with his own violent Rube Goldberg contraption, which is that he calls the number on his rubber ducky business card, which is 333-3333. It triggers his answering machine, which then pulls a cord that will drop his handicapped brother, who is dangling suspended over the pool, and who will drown. An insane move that in the moment, you know, Jamie and I were freaking out because it was like are these protagonists going to be like more evil than he is?
Yeah.
Because like he's tried to run people over with a car, I guess, but he's not killed a handicapped man who's
also
completely innocent
in this whole thing. Yeah. So it's just like, it's so funny to watch. And I think the funniest framing of it for me is just them having the kind of like they're fighting because it's been revealed to Phil Collins that his brother is dangling over the pool and everything. And as they're fighting, you can just see the guy in the wheelchair dangling.
The imagery of him swinging back and forth in the back of the frame.
I was losing
so ridiculous and cruel.
Yeah, I was losing it. I thought it was so funny and like weirdly disturbing, and it's such a turn for Hugo's character. It's on purpose because they're trying to be like, yeah, he's matching his energy now to defeat him, but it's just so cruel and dark, honestly, but it makes it funny.
Yeah, well, and it also, you know, it does get revealed a little bit, at least in the climax, that it was all a bit of stage production, because we get, you know, this all. Yeah, we get all this fight between Weaving and Collins, and it's all in this like wide angle lens shot on their like sweaty faces. They're rolling the dice. I did think it was going to come up the wife, and maybe it is because the wife just does leave him by the end. But I was curious if they were going to address the fact that Hugo totally bets her life, thinking that saw blade is real. He bets 50-50, and he's just like, yeah, if you roll, slice her in half. You know, if I roll, we're free to go. You know, and obviously he ends up winning that, but it was like just the fact that he was willing to bet that on the dice was kind of insane. It ends up in an altercation where they're sledgehammering of board games. They're throwing each other into paint cans and everything. And Collins does eventually make his way back up to the rope with Hugo like tugging at his leg, and he pulls on it, and Beth slides down, but the saw blade is then revealed to have been a prank the entire time, because this is a whole movie about the people who just play the most classic pranks.
Yes,
and
deception.
That level of reveal, or sorry, relief that she feels at that reveal, when she's just like, oh my God, but also then anger, which is one of my favorite
and then Phil
details
Collins
of it.
Laughing his ass off about it, like, haha, gotcha.
Yeah, because she safely lands in his cartoon car, but he obviously did really scare her.
Yeah.
And so she makes the call to drop the brother into the pool, which then freaks Collins out. And he's like, you know, he dives into the pool. He's crying. He's freaking out. He's trying to untie him. He basically almost kills himself trying to get his brother out of his wheelchair so he doesn't drown. And then he pulls the head off, and he realizes that his brother was actually a dummy and that they pranked him too with another classic gag.
Classic prank. I remember that one.
Yeah, you're almost drowning handicapped brother gag. Everyone knows this one.
Yep, we had a pool growing up, so I got to pull that off every summer. It was great.
And it does lead to a pretty actually like an ending that I think is well thought out. And I do wonder if it was like this idea was more focused on. I think I would have even liked the movie more. Sure. Which is that Jonathan goes in and saves Collins from drowning, and Collins is obviously incredibly upset, incredibly angry because he thought his brother had just died. And the way that when he pulls him out of the pool and they both sit on the edge of the pool, it's just Hugo Weaving and Phil Collins next to each other, both having dealt with this incredibly stressful, thrillery finale. And then they both just start laughing very quietly. And then it starts getting a little bit more.
Pranksters
and
respect pranksters, bro.
That's right, man. It literally is respect. They go, wow, your prank was funny. And they start laughing at each other's pranks on each other and how elaborate and crazy the scheming all was. And they're just slowly losing their minds with laughter as you can hear the police sirens pulling up to the ridiculous house they're about and whatever circumstance they just came across that they'll have to try to explain.
Yeah. And Beth walks away and she starts like smiling too. And you're just, I kind of understand the Hugo Weaving change, as insane as it is. I really do enjoy it, and
you're right. She should have totally had the Texas Chainsaw, like she's the one running away in horror still.
Yeah, and
like both men
and Hugo and Phil become best friends, and she's just like, I'm fucking
absolutely. I agree 100%. I think if that was the ending, I would even probably go up a star on this.
Oh yeah, totally.
That it was just two men torturing this wife,
until they find friendship amongst each other. And she's left alone.
Yeah, because again, that's part of what I mean when I say that I don't think it's totally thought through the characterizations. Like I don't think
totally.
Like you don't even have to like this movie is being wacky and weird, so I'm not asking for it to make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
But there's a few slight changes they could make that I think would send home the themes a little bit of the idea of these being two men who play incredibly gross games. And it makes just a couple choices that kind of undercut it just a little bit, even if all of the visual sophistication in the directing is on display to totally capture the fact that these men totally see this world as a game in which to manipulate and stage and play crazy productions and shows on each other, basically.
And I do love that the lesson isn't learned. They don't have an epilogue where Hugo and Phil kind of have a discussion about like, well, maybe we should just tone it down, but we can respect each other, anything like that. It's literally just they respect each other for the insane pranks that they were pulling on each other to get through the situation, and they laugh together, and that's it. Like there's the lesson learned here is very gray, and I love that so much. Honestly, it makes me. I agree with you that those themes could be wrapped up a little tighter, and I think like what you said might have been a good example of that. But the one thing that I think they did do right is the like almost no lesson learned by Hugo in a sense, and they just like each other more now. I think that's
no
funny.
doubt. Conceptually, it's a great ending.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's unbelievably funny. So yeah, I really. Do you want to wrap it up? Did you have anything?
Yeah,
else?
I'm good. Yeah, I think we can pivot towards reductive rating round. But yeah, I'm gonna say that this is in the high 3 territory for me.
Yeah,
but like
really
I would say a pretty damn high 3.
Yeah, it's like if I did point numbers, it'd be like a 3.9. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like I'm in a very similar boat because I do think that like the small things it gets wrong are kind of like little nitpicks.
Yeah.
And everything else about it is, like really well handled. I do think that it is a bit of a tonal mess, both in just how it's been edited together and in some of the performances, but mostly the Phil Collins performance. But that's also part of kind of the appeal of doing like a crazy, wacky stunt casting and putting him into a movie that is, like just genuinely a fun house of man-children playing incredibly elaborate pranks on one another to the point where, we have a guy who's directing it. So it's like Nightmare on Elm Street meets Willy Wonka, like it's just,
totally,
like that, like on a certain level, I think if that's what you're trying to go for, you're going to end up with some mixed results. And, but I will say I was quite surprised, having not seen a Stephen Elliott film, that the directing and the visual style was maybe the most impressive thing about it, and was what really turned it from being like what would have just been a simple crime gone wrong farce that could have been handled in a more boring way. And the filmmaking is genuinely like energetic and diabolical and just like all over the place, like just as invested in the contraptions and the bizarre dynamicism of the sets, and like the camera is excited to explore all of this shit, and the camera is what helps you get excited about the way these guys are supposed to be getting excited about the games that they play and stuff. So yeah, like I think it's a totally bizarro thriller that I'm surprised has only been seen by 400 people on Letterboxd. So
yeah, this
I would
is a hidden
genuinely
gem
recommend.
through and through.
Apparently for some people, this is available on Tubi. There is also, I think, a YouTube copy for anyone who can't find it by other means.
Nice.
So I would recommend people going out and checking this out if you want to see the mix of Dr. Seuss and Child's Play 2, as Jamie and I are going to be pitching it as. That's our official film critics comparison. It's like this meets this on crack,
An absolute thrill ride.
Yeah, but very, very strange, very, very carnival-esque, and yeah, definitely made me feel like I was missing a lost Tim Burton film, and I definitely think this is going to become a movie that I show people, and I'm going to come back to, and I don't know, maybe the flaws kind of become less important to me in a couple watches. I see this as one that possibly goes up in rating for me. So yeah,
I totally agree. It's I love its commitment to its wackiness. I really do love Phil. I think everyone's great in this, but Phil Collins just fully committing to the wackiness. Even though sometimes the certain tonal things can be a little bit messy and unclear, I still found every single time he was on screen to be just so incredibly interesting. He's not only does he do like a very cartoonish performance, but with the styling, like you have him doing these super close-ups on his face as he's contorting his face and all that. Very similar to what we were talking about with Freaked. He is kind of doing almost what Alex Winters is doing, just in the sense of the hyperbolized facial expressions and the way he does like maniacal laughter and things like that. It's just he's really going for it, and you can tell that Phil Collins is having such a fun time. And I did see here that he did later say that he thinks it's a great film, and that he says that he was better in it than in Buster, which I haven't seen Buster, but apparently he thinks that this is his performance, the one to look out for. So I think it's great. I do think, like we said, some of the more serious stuff within the characters isn't handled incredibly well, or it's just because of the tone. It just doesn't quite just doesn't quite land it. It's a little bit too wacky for also doing this whole thing where it's like she's trying to get over the trauma of killing her friend, and that scene where she does kill her friend, just there's really nothing else
an
like
insane
it tonally.
Scene.
Yeah, so I would have liked a little more balance in that regard, but a lot of me also just likes how fucking
it
insane
is
this
the main
thing is.
scene that's like full on like horror.
Yes.
And honestly, I think it could have stood to do that a little bit more. Like the fact that it kind of climaxes that early with that, like maybe I feel like more horror brought into that finale could have been nice too.
I agree. And I think it would have made more sense for Josephine's character as well. Like I think Hugo and Phil get a really good ending, and hers just feels a little disconnected from everything that she's gone through. So it feels a little strange in that sense, but I don't know. I do think that I might upgrade this eventually. This is something I want to show people. It's a true hidden gem through and through. Like we said, 400, 500 people on Letterboxd, and this thing
this
looks
is the rare
really
the
good.
rare Sleazoids discovery by happenstance, because I was just scrolling on the 1993 Midnight Madness slate, and I was like, "What the hell is that?"
Yeah.
Phil
And
Collins.
This
what?
is a
What do
hell
you
of a
mean?
find. I'm really happy that it was kind of exactly what I wanted it to be when you presented it to me. When you just said it's Phil Collins, it's a wacky comedy. He's pranking people as a insurance agent. I'm like, honestly, kind of the tone that it took was where my brain was at a little bit, in the hopes that that's what it would become, and it was exactly that. So yeah, I can't be mad. I think this might get the upgrade, but for now, the tonal stuff still hits me a little bit strangely. So I'll give it the strongest possible 3 that I can give it. Highly recommend it, though. Highly recommend.
Hell yeah, same here. That'll wrap it up, I think, for this week's episode. That was Freaked from 1993, as well as Frauds from 1993. Thanks so much for listening. I guess this is where we normally have the guests plug, so I guess we will plug ourselves. Listen to our show.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah.
Please keep listening.
That's right. You guys, I mean, you made it this far. I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
You know, you listen to an entire episode on a movie you probably haven't seen.
And they were probably longer than
400
the movies.
listens. Yeah. So this is just how it goes on this show. So thanks. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for the support. We will be back in 1 week's time over on the Patreon with a Joseph H. Lewis episode, the B Hollywood filmmaker of his era who did all kinds of noirs and thrillers and westerns and I'm trying to remember what else he made around. He made a lot of different kinds of movies. Look up Joseph H. Lewis's career, you would be like, wow, this guy kind of made a little bit of everything. And we are going to be specifically, though, talking about 2 of his weirder ones, because most people will know him for The Big Combo, which is like one of the more famous like B noir films, and The Killers, I believe it's called. Or no, sorry, I'm getting it confused with the Don Siegel film. Gun Crazy is the other noir that he made. That's very, very good, and most people will kind of know that one, especially if you have like a Criterion subscription. Those very frequently get put on Criterion. But we're going to be talking about his 1945 noir called My Name is Julia Ross, which is actually one of the early Gaslight thrillers. And definitely gets to the point where it leans into more horror than it does noir. And we're going to be pairing that with Terror in a Texas Town from 1958, which is another virtual watch find for Jamie and I, where Sterling Hayden plays a Swedish whaler who hangs out in an American Western, including carrying a harpoon around that he uses to fight the various corrupt bandits who are taking over the town.
Let's go.
It's a absolutely ridiculous premise, and Joseph H. Lewis, he was a very, very good and sturdy director, and so he kind of nails both the gaslight thriller and the wacky Western. So that's what we're going to be talking about on Patreon next week. And then in 2 weeks' time over on the main feed, we are going to be back with a special guest who hasn't chosen their films yet. So we are on it. We're trying to figure it out. We're in the DMs. We're talking about it. But I'm sure it's going to be fun. It is a guest who has been on once a year for a very long time. So, and I'm sure people will be very interested in his picks when he eventually messages me back. But until then, I don't know what we're up to. I'm at TIFF. I'm writing reviews at TIFF, so go on over to the Letterboxd. I'm sure I'm watching all kinds of new movies people might be interested in. I've already filed a bunch of screener reviews, and Jamie, I'm sure, having just finished the tour and having just caught up on recording, is going to be going right back into movie mindset mode. He's going to be watching so many movies a day.
Yep. I'm going to be catching up on some 2023 2- and 3-star movies, I'm sure. I am, Samurai, you know what, the band is also, we're mixing the EP right now, so I will be listening to new songs, and I you know, if anyone does listen to
new
the
music
band,
on the way.
Yeah, new music is on the way, and I listened to the 2 first mixes that we got from the new mixer that we're working with, and they sound pretty damn beefy. So yeah, stay tuned if you're into it.
Spotify, I'm assuming Apple Music. Along Came a Spider. Check out Jamie's band.
Check it out.
Do it up. Yeah, look at us getting our own plugs in this week.
Yeah, we're doing it now. We got a chance.
We do stuff too.
Yeah, we
not
do
just
stuff
our guests,
outside
you know.
the show too. Look at that.
That's right. You know, come on. I don't watch fucking 4 movies a day at TIFF for none of you to, you know, go and read that shit.
Exactly.
Come
Putting
on.
in the work.
Yeah. But that being said, that wraps it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.